The following program contains material of an enlightening manner. Open-mindedness is advised.
Today, I want you to open your mind.
I've almost come to the conclusion that the story is so damning that the mass of people can't deal with it.
We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques to get people actually to love their servitude.
We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method.
We are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
To change the minds and the attitudes and the beliefs of the people of the world, and especially the United States, to bring about one world socialist totalitarian government.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
As you connect the dots between different people, organizations, places, religions, history, suddenly the picture starts to form. You don't connect the dots, it's just a mass of what's all this about.
The kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure.
Someone born in the United States is not more special than someone born in Mexico. Someone who is white is not more special than someone who is black. They're just vehicles for the consciousness to experience.
Brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people.
War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength.
Humans as a species are prone to amnesia. Those who do not remember the past are doomed to repeat it. It is thus imperative that these all-important matters be thoroughly explored and not left up to blind faith.
It's about time some of you got acquainted with the real hard truth.
What you are now experiencing is the vibration of air particles being transformed into electrical signals by your senses and DNA, then sent to the brain where they are decoded into sounds. I'm your host, Ryan Gable, and you are listening to The Secret Teachings. Our website is www.thesecretteachings.info. That's www.thesecretteachings.info. And if you missed the last couple of weeks, you've missed a lot of great information and great guests. Last week on the program, we had the award-winning journalist and author, the one and only Jim Marrs, to talk about his new book, Population Control, which tied in with a 5-part series that we have been running on population control, as well as the eugenics movement tied in with Planned Parenthood and the many, many other ways that eugenics is unraveled through a systematic form of cultural genocide, be that through vaccinations, and we've looked into a history of those over the past couple of weeks, the Nazi T4 vaccine programs, the British Columbia Sterilization Act targeted towards natives, the sterilization acts that the United States had on the books in the early 1900s, that of which the Nazi Party actually got a lot of their ideas from, including the gas chambers that were used during World War II in the concentration camps. We also talked about the poisoning of food and water, as well as the genetically modified organisms, of course, the GMOs that we talk about quite often here on the program, and how all of this ties into a much larger system of control, partially under an agenda of the 21st century known as Agenda 21, or maybe better known as sustainable development, which has sort of become a buzzword, sustainability, where people start talking about how we need to sustain the environment, we need to allow the environment to live and breathe, if you will, and we need to kind of stop human development. And we hear about how the earth is overcrowded and how we need to, and it's kind of put into a very subconscious type of attack when politicians talk about this, or when you see it in newspaper articles, which I posted on the website, thesecretteachings.info before, where they talk about how we need to sustain the environment, create biodiversity, when the very people promoting this image are destroying diversity, destroying animal and crop species. And all of this is happening with the help of a few mega corporations, which have a lot of ties to these international banks, of course, and have a lot of ties to these international elite bloodline families tied in with the royal family and, of course, the connections to presidents and prime ministers around the world, and the centralization of power into a one-world government. Of course, Pope Jorge Bergoglio is coming to speak in September on sustainable development and immigration. This is a man coming from a sovereign city, a religious world leader coming to lecture our Congress on sustainability. So we've been covering all of that in the past couple of weeks. Of course, like I said, Jim Marrs last week, that episode is available at thesecretteachings.info to download for free. You can also stream it from the website or on your mobile device if you don't want to download it. And the week before that, we had Karen A. Dahlman to talk about the spirit of alchemy, and we also tied that in to a 4-hour episode, the fourth part of our sustainable development series. So the website is, again, thesecretteachings.info. You'll be able to find the Secret Teachings archive there with all of our past episodes. Again, you can download or stream those programs for free. You will also find a top news tab with all of the news stories that we've been covering, including links to the Planned Parenthood videos from the Center for Medical Progress, and you will be able to find links on there to, of course, the EPA polluting the Animas River. Obviously, nobody gets in trouble for that. Most of it was probably a ploy to get more funding to the EPA. And we've seen a lot of other stuff in the news, and we are going to talk about a lot of that today as I welcome our guest / co-host, as I've gotten to know Brad Olsen pretty well over the last couple of years. Brad Olsen's website is bradolsen.com. It's BRADOLSEN.com. His other website is esotericseries.com, and that features his 2 books, Future Esoteric, The Unseen Realms, and Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses. Brad Olsen is one of my top 10 favorite authors of all time. He's got awesome information in these 2 books. And we'll go ahead and welcome Brad to the show. Brad, welcome to The Secret Teachings. Welcome back, actually. How are you doing?
Hey, Ryan. Great to be back. And hope I can stand up to Jim Marrs. That's a tough act to follow.
It is a tough act to follow, but I think that you're the best man for that job, Brad.
Do my best.
You guys had an earthquake in San Francisco recently, didn't you?
Yeah, it actually was an earthquake. It wasn't San Francisco. It was across the bay in Piedmont, which is actually like part of Oakland. But it sure woke me up. I felt all right. It was a 4.0, so you felt the building rock and roll a little bit, but nothing fell off the shelves. It was nothing close to the 89 earthquake, and I was down in Santa Cruz for that one. And that one, everything fell off the shelves, and it felt like the buildings were going to fall down. And when I ran out to the street, I saw the telephone poles shaking, and I had just moved out to California within a year when that happened. And coming from Chicago, of course, never felt anything like that. And then when I saw the rollers coming up the street, I laid down to feel it, and I'm like, wow, this is just awesome force of nature to feel this. And everybody's like, how can you just take this so lightly? Can't you see we're in the middle of a disaster?
I'd say it's pretty terrifying, but it also is sort of humbling to see the power of nature.
Exactly. And so when this other one came and went, I'm just like, felt a dozen of those since I've been out here for the last 20 some years. Just went back to sleep. Yeah,
that reminds me of Robin Williams, his last stand-up, where he was talking about how people in L.A., when they have friends from another state come in, everybody panics when there's an earthquake, and most people that live in L.A., they just they feel a 5.6.0, they just pick up their wine and say, maybe we should just go outside. They're just so used to it. There's a lot of things that I wanted to talk about today, Brad. I know you said you had some news to tell us about. Maybe we could go ahead and start there. I think you mentioned something about a cure for Morgellons disease, correct?
That's right. Doing it right now. It's with magnets, and I've had these lesions on my arms and legs for several years now. I've been going to the dermatologist for several years now. Tried everything from homeopathic remedies to all the salves and creams that they've prescribed me to things I've gotten over the counter and recommended by friends. Nothing topical has worked. Nothing internal has worked. And when I say worked, I mean the knockout blow. And just on Tuesday afternoon, I received 3 magnets, which are just basic heavy-duty kind of magnets to hang up your work belt or use for your refrigerator. 3 weights, if people are interested in getting these. There's the 95-pound weight. That means it can hold up to 95 pounds. 65-pound weight and a 25-pound weight. And using the magnets to create the negative effect of deflecting each other rather than the attraction, it's the deflection part of the magnetism that seems to be the knockout blow that I've been looking for. And I have seen incredible changes in the last few days. And just yesterday I had another dermatologist appointment, went into SF General, where they do have one of the best teams of dermatologists. And it just so happened that this week in the newspaper called the SF Weekly, there's a big expose on chemtrails. And one aspect of it is Morgellons being part of the mix that they're spraying on us. So when I went and saw the doctor, it was a doctor I hadn't seen before. The last time I went in there, they suggested I get on psychiatric medications.
Oh, of course.
I'm very much against that, and it was laughable to me. So I went in there this time and just read this new doctor, an excerpt from this SF Weekly article on the chemtrails regarding Morgellons, and it said, some people think that they're parasites, and I told the doctor, no, they're not. Some people think they're insects. No, they're not. Some people think they're self-replicating nanotechnology fibers, and I said, that's what it is. And the fact that this magnet treatment, which I basically got off the website called morgellonscure.com, is revolutionary in so much that it not only proves that Morgellons is a nanotechnology fiber that can live in our bodies for extended periods of time, can self-replicate, can produce bacteria, can produce fungus, but none of the drugs that are prescribed for it work. So now I have these magnets, and I'm seeing incredible results, and I expect to be fully cleared up by the time I go to Denver at the end of the month. And that's the second announcement, that I've been invited to be on George Nouri's TV show called Beyond Belief. So I'll get a chance to hang out with George, and we're going to tape a pair of shows while I'm out there in the Boulder area.
Yeah, and you get to go through the Denver airport too, probably.
Yeah, I'll get to see all the symbology. Although I heard they painted over those murals. That they no
some
longer
of them, I heard, yes.
But some are still there. And I think the big white horse is still there with the red eyes.
Yeah. They say it's supposed to be a Denver Bronco, but it's pretty sinister looking.
One of the horses of the apocalypse, I'd say.
Perhaps. On Morgellons disease, I really don't know that much about it. I've heard doctors talk about it. I've heard other alternative shows where there's been a guest discuss it, and there are some of the, I guess you could call, symptoms that I thought maybe I had it. But I don't really know any details about it. I don't know how graphical it could be, or how much you want to get into it. But maybe could you explain what the disease actually is, and maybe just give us a little bit of details on how obviously you're a dermatologist. You got to a point where they didn't know how to fix it, so they just wanted to put you on psychotic drugs, right?
Right. And every time I'd go in there, I'm very much on topic and always insisted it was fibers. And they have a term for it. It's dementia parapsychosis, something like that. That it's all made up in the head. Yet we did biopsies, and I'm very much into helping established science get a handle on this, because I know even some of my friends are suffering from this. So I really haven't made an official announcement about this yet, and of course I'm going to write it up and I'm going to include it in my next book, Beyond Esoteric. But I did want to get to the point where I felt really positive that what I'm talking about here with the magnets is really the way to treat it. So basically, to answer your question, it starts out very subtly. It started out with me like little white spots, and because I like to play volleyball, I thought they were just like sunspots on the skin. And unfortunately, for about a year or two, I totally blew it off, thinking I could just scrub my skin really hard and make it go away. But of course, that didn't work. And then these fibers started showing up, and when they started showing up, I noticed them on my hand first, and that is still a location that still has an infection on it from these things, because they do create an infection that make the wound like it's septic. That I can't tell you how many tubes of Neosporin and other healing creams I've put on there to make them heal up, because they don't, because the fibers stay in the skin, so they have the ability to evade the immune system's natural ability to spit these things out like they would with a sliver or something that gets lodged in the skin. It doesn't ever last forever.
Do they spread? Are they sparse, or is it kind of concentrated in one area?
Well, it does concentrate in one area, but eventually it will spread. And they do itch, and they do hurt. So the natural tendency is to scratch at them and dig at them, and once in a while you can get a big one out, or go to get medical treatment and get a biopsy. And the few times that I did that at SF General, at least one time I saw the little jar they put it in, and I saw it. It was about the size of a grain of rice. So these things can get big, and they can get nasty. And the times that I was using bandages to cover them up, I take off the bandage and I find all these little fibers in there. So that's the self-replicating part of it, because when they mature, these fibers then just start kicking out more fibers. And in the article in SF Weekly, one of the persons who spoke about Morgellons said that self-replicating fibers have to be two of the scariest words I've ever heard, she said in the article. And I would wholeheartedly agree, because now what we're dealing with, not only, and by the way, this was totally news to this top team of dermatologists at SF General yesterday, and they did give me the go-ahead to work with the magnets, and they were very interested to hear my results and said, write down everything. We're going to have you back in 5 or 6 weeks. If it shows promise that this works, this could be a huge breakthrough. And I would agree, and I'd work with them and tell them everything I know, because this is my ability to be in service to others and help other people through this. And I have a friend that I play volleyball with that I'm going to have over for dinner one night. We're going to try the magnets on him and see if we can get him some healing going on. But all the ointments, all the salves, all the lotions and creams that I've used, nothing works like these magnets. I have to say this has been the best news of the week, even up there with getting the invitation to go down and do a couple shows with Nori. This is huge, because this is anybody that knows anyone who has Morgellons or has it themselves knows that it's embarrassing, it's disfiguring, and it's very frustrating that there is no cure that is being offered by the medical community. But the other big thing about this, Ryan, is it absolutely proves that we are being sprayed with something very foreign and very new to our bodies. And what we're doing is heading down this road called transhumanism without really even talking about what the ramifications are. And I know we're going to talk about a few of these things on the show, including eugenics, and I think they all tie together very seamlessly, as well as the chemtrail spraying and how they've found these Morgellon fibers in the chemtrail mix. And I think it's just another one of the soft kill methods of trying to cull the herd.
Well, no, I definitely agree with you. And see, now we're getting into a lot of areas which obviously you have to have a really, at least basic understanding of multiple different disciplines to be able to put all of this together, at least to be able to see an underlying sort of agenda. Now, when it comes to Morgellons, you're talking about nano-size particulates, if you will, nano-robots. Is this something that would be almost like a science fiction movie? Is this something that had to be engineered, or is this maybe a byproduct of some type of government testing? What do you think?
Oh, I think it absolutely had to have been engineered. And it's engineered to avoid being captured, for one. Like, you can see some fibers move under the skin, and of course when you're going at them, they try to evade being taken out of the skin. So they are like a life form, but I think they're a synthetic life form. And therefore we're talking about some very deep and sophisticated and dark technology that is being unleashed on to the human race. And from what I understand, everybody has it right now. Ryan, you have it right now. And here's a way you and your listeners can do a little test after the show, or your listeners can do it during the show. Take a glass of red wine or dark, preferably organic grape juice if you don't want any alcohol in your mouth. Don't swallow it, but swish it around in your mouth for about 4 or 5 minutes. But before you do, hold up the glass, inspect the glass, look at the wine or grape juice, make sure there's no impurities in there, and then spit it out. And what you'll see are these fibers. They're of a different nature, but they're running through all of us. And I've done this with a dozen or more people. Every single one had these fibers in their mouth. Not lesions on their skin like me, but the fibers in their mouth. So myself and other Morgellons researchers who I've talked to, and including Sophia Smallstorm, who did a video on chemtrails and Morgellons, all agree that everybody has it. And so what we're talking about is perhaps a major health crisis on our hands. And I can only hope that the dermatologists at SF General will look at this seriously and finally take me for my word and what I'm telling them about this thing and study this thing. Now, that their pat response all this time has been, well, the CDC researched it and they didn't find anything. Well, this doctor I talked to yesterday, towards the end of the conversation, when she said, I talked to my superior and she said, go ahead with the magnets and we'd like to see how that works for you. And I said, let me just remind you, when AIDS came on the scene in the late 80s, nobody knew what that was either. And there's also evidence that that is a synthetic
bioweapon,
introduced bioweapon as well. And I told this doctor, I go, there's an opportunity for you to become world famous, just like the first AIDS researchers, and work with me on this and work with what I'm telling you, because if these magnets work, then they are frying the circuitry of these nanofibers and basically making them inoperative. And so the other thing, since I've just gotten the magnets on Tuesday, just this last Tuesday at 6 p.m., every shower I've taken, even if I've barely even gone outside or done anything, are just the dirtiest showers. I mean, they're just coming out of me like just the broken particles of this Morgellon nest in my body. And so I talked to Michael Cipria, who has developed the MorgellonsCure.com website, and this is where I've been tipped off, and I really give him the credit for all the work in magnetism he's done. And in fact, he even has a clinic down in Matamoros, Mexico. Of course, he can't operate here. They'd shut him down like Royal Raymond Rife. And in fact, he's even doing some Rife machine work as far as finding the frequency of cancer and then just exploding it. And it's the same thing with Morgellons. They are vulnerable to the negative force of magnets, and it just explodes their circuitry, and then they just become debris, and then the body can exfoliate it naturally. But when they're alive, I'm telling you, they are – I have been dogged to try to get these things out of me, tried every single method you can imagine. Nothing works like the magnets.
So the good news is the magnets are working, and I wouldn't say that this is bad news, but more on a darker side, I would say that to see that there's nanotechnology, you've got evidence that this is working, that is the actual cause of Morgellons disease, then you have to go back and look at the technology available even to the public eye that would be able to create this type of nanobot technology. And you have to go back decades. And I would think that if this has been around for so many decades, Brad, this is probably some type of very secretive black operations, underground laboratory type deal going on here. I don't think that this probably has anything to do even with the military. That's my take. I think that this is maybe a much deeper underlying method of eugenics. Maybe it's not even human. I don't know, but those are my thoughts.
I would agree with you, and that was the next place I was going to go with this, is that we are talking about an agenda that may even be transhuman beyond humans' development altogether. Because the other thing about these Morgellons, and if you go to morgellonscure.com and read Michael's research and website on it, they do get their energy from all the electromagnetic waves going out there. So, for example, the Wi-Fi, the radio waves, the electricity in the air seem to be what keeps these things alive. And I've also noticed anytime I got a really big fiber out, it bled profusely. So it is integrating into the body in such a way that it evades capture, as I said, and it also self-replicates, as I say, but also has a way to get deep into the tissue. So sometimes, and I'm finding this now as I'm smashing these things with the magnets, that they're coming up from a spot that I thought I had completely cleared out. They just keep coming up from the same spot. So this leads me to believe that maybe they are integrated into the entire body of a person. And maybe they're even in the animal kingdom by now. Maybe everything's got them. And if this is the case, we need to get some answers on this real darn quick, because a lot of people are going to start suffering. I see people just every day on the streets who I suspect have Morgellons, and pretty soon I'll reach out to them randomly and just say it's all about the magnets. But again, I want to be 100% sure about this, so in about a week or two, if my findings continue at the pace they are, I'm going to write an article and include photos and links to Michael's research and quote some of his stuff too, because this could be absolutely huge.
Absolutely, Brad. I mean, this is pretty incredible. I think that there's two T words that are important here. You said transhumanism. I also want to add another word. I want to add terraforming. To me, it seems like with this story, with the story of geoengineering of the environment, the genetic modification of food, animal life, plant life, the patenting of nature, the dehumanization of the human species, and the altering of the planet, including radiation testing, everything that we've done to this place, it just seems like, to me, when you start to look at all of the details, it looks like there's an agenda at hand, and it looks like it's beyond human incompetence or beyond corporate negligence. It seems as if the planet is being terraformed, and that's actually what I went into in my new book about eugenics, that perhaps there's an extraterrestrial influence and the Earth has already been invaded. I know that might seem out there to a lot of people, but so do nanotechnology, nanobots infesting every human on Earth. That might seem out there to some people too. But again, like you said, Brad, AIDS, nobody knew about that when it first came on the scene either, and now we've got a lot of evidence to show that that was bioengineered to target specific parts of the population, such as the black community.
Yes, and there's also evidence that Ebola was another introduced virus that came onto the scene quite suddenly, and it too was meant to get rid of the undesirables, the poorest of the poor in Africa and so forth. The signature of both of these viruses comes out of Fort Detrick, Maryland, where they do this very high-tech research on viruses. And by the way, I had a bunch of people over here for my Christmas party last year, and we were talking about viruses, and one of the guys who I respect tremendously said, have you ever heard the theory that all viruses on planet Earth are ET introduced just to make us sicker, just to make us die sooner as part of the goal? And so I looked into that and have looked into that, and I would agree with some of your assumptions that this terraforming and transhumanism is part of the malevolent ET agenda, and that I'm not ruling out that all these viruses that are in the human system and have been for centuries could have been introduced by these malevolent reptoid gray species who do, if you know some of this exopolitic reasoning behind it, do want to have this planet suited for their needs. And this is how it ties in the chemtrails so perfectly too, because that's a form of terraforming. When you're blanketing the world with these chemtrails, which hold high amounts of aluminum, barium, strontium, and morgellons, maybe you're trying to make the planet different. Maybe you're trying to make the soil infertile so organic growers are having a hard time coming up with anything that they could sell. And the bark is peeling off of trees, and trees are dying all across the country. Maybe they want to get us to the stress point where humans are just as hopeless as they can be, and maybe that's a good opportune time to make a big move on the scene and finally come above ground with that. And that could happen as soon as next month, with all the things that I'm seeing happening in the month of September with all these religious holidays and the Pope coming over here. And boy, we're seeing the stock market tank for the second time in a row today. 530 off the Dow today, and yesterday knocked off all the gains. So it's funny when the stock market starts to react to big news ahead of time. It kind of makes me believe that there are some higher motivations out there. And I mean, not just money and stocks, which is very much a human-made phenomenon, but some of these bigger macro trends, such as perhaps these malevolent ETs finally becoming known to the human race, and for them to say, hey, we're here too, and we're more powerful than you, and you'll bow down to us. But maybe that won't be before they try to off 90% of us, as we've seen stated on the Georgia Guidestones.
We're already seeing that agenda unfold, and as part of the transhuman agenda, what it also seems like to me is there is a specific sort of plan in place that through everything that we experience, whether it's a slow integration of people now where they literally they have sleep disorders, insomnia, they've got neurological development disorders, not just because of vaccinations and food, but simply because from the time these kids are born, they're given a phone, they're given a tablet, they're given a computer, a television. We're constantly absorbed in this digital virtual reality that takes us out of the physical world. And the more and more we become subdued by that, it's almost as if we're de-evolving, and on top of that, being dehumanized by being told that it's our fault the earth is heating up because we're breathing too much, we're having too many kids, or the sun is bad, don't go out of the sun, even though the sun can actually cure cancer. It helps to produce vitamin D, it can cure influenza, depression, and a whole list of other positive effects on the human being. And through all of these processes of dehumanization and fracturing of the society, it does seem like there is an agenda in place for some species. Maybe it's a group of psychopaths that we can't get into their mind because we have empathy and these people lack it. Maybe it is an extraterrestrial species. Whatever the case is, at the end of the day, I don't think it's even necessarily important. It can be fun, but not necessarily important to talk about who's really in charge, because we know the problems we face. Then we have to move, after we make that realization, we have to move to the next step, and that is start addressing these problems individually and informing others. And, as a matter of the transhuman agenda, part of, being integrated in all of this technology, Brad, I see that more and more and more people have become so fractured from the rest of society because they go online, they have one personality, they go out in public, they have a new personality. It's creating a type of split personality disorder. It's causing, problems in relationships and families. Everybody is just so absorbed in the digital world, and I think that is a part of the transhuman agenda. And then they take it a step further when they introduce the Google glasses, when they introduce the microchips into the human population. For example, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who funded sulfate spraying in Mexico to block out the sun, they paralyzed 48,000 children in Africa after they gave them vaccines. This is a man, Bill Gates, whose father was on Planned Parenthood, a eugenics genocide vehicle, and he has like 500,000 shares in Monsanto. So he has a vested interest in every one of these different avenues. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they partnered with a microchip company to now where if you're a woman, you can get a microchip implanted in you, and through remote control, it will release hormones into your body to control the birth rate. So the more and more we fall into this digital world, Brad, we don't just fall into it because we're forced. We fall into it because it's instant gratification, because it's addictive, and because we'll pay for it with our own money. We're buying our own servitude. We're building our own prison. And as Aldous Huxley said many years ago, eventually there are methods that will be developed to get people to actually love their servitude, and that's what I'm personally seeing now.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. And the other thing just along those lines is, what about all the cell phones out there? What about the radiation?
Well, they chose they chose the microwave spectrum of visible light for cellular communications. I mean, that's not a matter of, oops, it's an accident. That's done on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, San Francisco had an ordinance a few years ago that all brand new cell phones had to come with a verbal disclosure. Well, the cell phone companies jumped on top of it. San Francisco backed away. Berkeley picked up the mantle. They also have a law on the books that if you buy a cell phone in Berkeley, you have to get a disclaimer from the store you buy it from that there are studies that show that using cell phones can create brain tumors. Well, of course, what's in the news this week? Cell phone companies are jumping all over this new Berkeley law, and they're suing Berkeley just as they did San Francisco. But the ironic thing is, when they do stuff like that, it just creates more awareness for what's going on, and people are becoming more aware that cell phones cause brain cancer and brain tumors. I had 3 friends who were my age, in their 40s, die a few years ago of brain tumors. This didn't happen before. This is very rare to get brain cancer more than 50 years ago. So here's another silent epidemic that's happening right before our eyes. And think about when you use a cell phone. I personally almost always put it on speakerphone and hold it at arm's length. I do not want that device near my head, because I used to get headaches from it. And then after my 3 friends died in 1 year, like, this is bad news.
The World Health Organization acknowledged that it causes brain tumors, and I've seen multiple studies. You can probably look them up online, where someone is photographed thermally before they use a phone, and then after using the phone for 10 minutes, there's another photograph taken thermally, and the side of the head where the phone is superheated like 10 times what it was before they put the phone there, which, I mean, should be pretty obvious to people that you're putting a microwave to your head.
Yeah. And that's the thinnest part of the skull, too.
That's right.
Is right above the ear. That's where most murders in prisons occur. If you just have a blunt object that can be about the size of a screwdriver, they go for the temple right above the ear. It's almost paper thin. It's so thin where the skull protects from the brain. So we're putting low-level microwave devices not only at the thinnest part of our skull, but it also, through our ear, has an entryway. And as you said, there are multiple studies showing that cell phones are dangerous, yet they're everywhere, and people use them and don't even pay attention to that.
I want to add something to what you mentioned about Morgellons and these nanobots, because when you look around, our society, our culture, our civilization, our planet is engulfed, entrenched. We are completely just covered in electromagnetic radiation, from cell phone towers to Wi-Fi signals, military communications, everything. And I was reading recently, actually, that a lot of these signals, they bounce off the upper atmosphere, and they just kind of bounce from the ground to and back and forth. So it creates a type of bubble that we're living in, another part of perhaps that terraforming, and I think that might tie into the transhuman agenda, if you will, and maybe even the Morgellons. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, as Michael off MorgellonsCure.com has stated several times, we are living in a sea of these invisible waves all around us. We're around it now because we have Wi-Fi for this talk. I try to use most of my telephone calls on the landline, and I have a headset on, which is not electric, so my computer's away from me. And yeah, we're being inundated with this stuff, and the Morgellons seems to be living off of it. So it's so funny that on the one hand, we're talking about these invisible radio waves and other electronic waves out there that we can't see or feel physically, but maybe doing us damage. Yet on the other hand is what seems to be the energy source for these Morgellons. So these agendas seem to be working hand in hand. And when I talk to people that still deny that we're being sprayed by chemtrails, well, for one, if I do cure the Morgellons with the magnets, and it looks like I will, that to me is absolute proof positive that, one, the establishment has no clue how to deal with this Morgellons crisis except prescribe psychiatric drugs. What a convenient way. And two, that the chemtrail operation is worldwide and it's very real, and we better start paying attention to this because our own health could very well be dependent on it.
Well, they admit that it's real. I mean, like I said, Bill and Melinda Gates, their foundation has funded millions of dollars into spraying sulfate particles into the atmosphere in order to block sunlight. The CIA had a public relations stunt a few years ago where they said, we're going to put $500,000 into looking into geoengineering of the environment. The White House has admitted it. There's been a lot of independent study groups that have admitted it. The engineering of the environment. So, I mean, it's been admitted. It is happening. So just because people don't want to believe it or they think it's too fantastical, I mean, I think part of the problem is people have been so conditioned, Brad, to just live in the now. So they don't look at the future. They don't look at what fast food is going to do to them in 10, 20, 30 years, what genetically modified food is going to do. And for the most part, we really collectively don't know because we're entering an age where all of this is really new. I mean, we have not had multiple generations of people growing up inundated with all of this electromagnetic pollution. We haven't had generations of humans living through, eating sludge and genetically modified foods and chemical concoctions in the water supply and all of these different factors that combine together to just create one grand science experiment. And, I think at the end of the day, the people that are even orchestrating this really don't care what the outcome is so long as the population is called and is dumbed down. I mean, look at the statistics from the CDC. By 2025, was it 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 kids will have autism? That's a substantial rise in autism, and that makes me think, and it should make everybody out there think, if we continue to go forward with the plans and the agendas and the medicine that we have, claiming that, it's the top-of-the-line medicine, it's the best medication, best vaccinations, you have to get it, it's all about safety and security and health, And the more medicine we have, the more vaccines we have, the more food we eat that we're guaranteed is safe and better for us than organic food. That's part of the public relations stunt and the propaganda and rhetoric. It seems the more sick we get. So if the more we participate in this system and the sicker we get, contrary to what the heads of the system tell us, it should make us think that something is fundamentally wrong. I mean, shouldn't it? Or maybe I'm just crazy.
Oh, Ryan, you're not crazy. You're a voice of reason in a forest of skeptics and deniers and those who hold on to these antiquated beliefs that government's only there to do us well are going to be the big losers in all this. And it's the people who start waking up and really start paying attention to the news behind the news, the stuff that's not on the boob tube, but the big breaking stories that come to us through the alternative media. For example, Dr. Bradstreet, famous doctor down in Florida, holistic doctor, had a major breakthrough in the month of June and started telling other holistic doctors in Florida, and they all started turning up dead. Dr. Bradstreet, successful doctor influencing people, patients that are being cured from autism, and I'll tell you how he did it in a second, found floating dead in a river with a shot to his chest. Okay, and he had a family, and he was loved by many, and he was not depressed. But he had come across what is called Morgellons. And I want everybody listening to Google this if they don't already know about it, because it is terribly important we know this. Morgellons is found in vaccines, okay? And Dr. Bradstreet had been working with children from the time of birth and tested their blood and found no Morgellons in their body. They went and got all these vaccines. They had the Morgellons, which was actively blocking vitamin D from the body to support the immune system. And as many of us know, most deaths today, especially in old people, are complications due to a lack of vitamin D. Okay? So the way these deaths turn up, oh, well, she had such and such a disease, heart disease, she had a stroke, but those are the reasons they died. But the symptoms leading up to it was this blockage of vitamin D, whether it's the propaganda we get from staying away from the sun or lathering up sunscreen before we go out, where the natural ability to absorb the vitamin D is very much inherent in all of us, and we need it badly. So what Dr. Bradstreet found, he developed, and through his research, a holistic compound called GCMAF. It's capital G, lower C, capital MAF. And this was what could break the Morgellons down, allow the free flow of vitamin D once again into the bodies, and get this, he was curing children from autism. They would walk out of Bradstreet's office a few months later, normal kids again. No more of the spasms, no more of the speech impediments, normal kids again. Bradstreet started sharing this findings with other holistic doctors. They all started dropping dead. It was only because one or two of these doctors who survived that got this information about the GCMAF got online and started telling us through the alternative media sources. Natural News broke the story that we got this out there, and it is huge news. And they were doing it in Europe as well. They had a board of a panel of physicians who shut down the distribution and manufacture of GCMAF, and basically it's all on hold right now. But I think if enough people start realizing what this can do for people and basically cure autism, as well as many other diseases. It also had applications for cancer patients and several other diseases which we're not being told there actually are cures for, such as cancer has been known to have been cured back in the 1930s with Royal Raymond Rife. So now we have another big one, another real big one, and doctors are dying because they know this. So this is what we're up against. We are really up against this monolithic, evil empire that wants to keep pushing these drugs that just don't work. And by the way, I saw a stat the other day. Cancer medications, just the meds, just the pharmaceuticals, $100 billion a year industry. So you don't think it's in their vested interest to keep Dr. Bradstreet's findings out of the public purview. So they're willing to kill for this. That's how big of a finding this was, and that's to the extent that they will go to keep this secret hidden. But I think it's going to get out there now, and we're going to realize that groups like the American Cancer Society,
Rockefeller
totally
founded.
fraudulent, completely fraudulent. Keep in mind, they don't call themselves the American Anti-Cancer Society.
Just the Cancer Society.
Just the Cancer Society. They're pro-cancer. Okay? If they weren't, they'd change their name, and they would be fully supporting Dr. Bradstreet's findings. So this is what we're up against, people, and I applaud people like you, Ryan, who are brave enough to get this information out there, that can grasp the gravity of this situation, that they quite frankly say, we want 90% of you gone, and these are the ways they're going to do it. The soft
That's right.
kill
These are not Brad Olsen's words. These are not my words. These are words from Ted Turner, Henry Kissinger, David Rockefeller, some of the people that make the policy decisions, not government heads like prime ministers and presidents, the people that influence them, the people that have the money and the influence to tell them what to do. But go ahead, Brad.
Just absolutely right. I mean, these are the people who basically are calling the shots. Let's call them the puppet masters, the cabal, the Illuminati. They go by many different names. They operate behind closed doors. They absolutely have an agenda, which is their own, which is service to self. They may have a way that they're working with these malevolent ETs. I would say they do, because we know that many things like chemtrails never get reported in the above-ground media, and that is very much controlled mass media propaganda. I mean, it should be the Ministry of Propaganda right out of George Orwell's 1984 for what it is, because it is just so insidiously directing us into areas that absolutely have no bearing on our life. Who cares if a cat got rescued from a tree? Doesn't matter. Who cares if a girl graduated with a 4.0 grade point average and went to college? Good for her, but that's not the information I need to make informed decisions in my life. So we have been completely led astray by this. It's gotten to the point where the network news is so sublime now, so ridiculous in the stories it reports, that I just have to put it on once in a while to get a laugh.
It's entertainment. It's entertainment.
That's all it is. That's really all it is. And the lines have been blurred to the point where it just comes across that way. I mean, we all know about Lindsay Lohan's slow mental breakdown and Charlie Sheen's sex life, but hardly anybody's heard about Dr. Bradstreet and his findings. So that was my point.
Well, people are more concerned with Kathleen or Catherine or whatever her name is, Jenner, and people are concerned, and this one really got me, Brad. When the Planned Parenthood scandal broke and the videos were released by the CMP showing the different heads of Planned Parenthood talking to potential buyers, selling aborted fetal tissue, selling aborted baby remains, kidneys, livers, hearts, lungs, brains. And when that broke, the head of Planned Parenthood, who has visited the White House 39 times since Obama took office, her name is Cecil Richards. She's the head of Planned Parenthood. I found it really interesting how they use these plays on words to distract people's attention. So as this was coming out, and people like John Boehner, Speaker of the House, and President Obama said there's not enough evidence, there's not enough information to investigate Planned Parenthood, yet people like Dianne Feinstein, who was given $10,000 by Planned Parenthood at least on one occasion, says we need to launch an investigation of the CMP, the people that broke the story, and not the people that are on video cutting the little babies up. But the point is, the head of the Planned Parenthood organization is Cecil Richards, and when they distracted people's attention as that was going on, they made everything in the news about Cecil the lion. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
So they used that play on words, and then, of course, Obama comes out at the same time and says what we really need to be concerned about is the organ harvesting of African albino males, and completely turn the story around from the organ harvesting of innocent babies and fetuses that were extracted from the womb and made it a story in Africa. It's just unbelievable. And I wanted to add something to what you said. Obviously this show goes back and forth so much, so sometimes it's hard to keep up. Talking about a cure for Morgellons disease using these magnets. You're talking about a cure for autism. Obviously, as you said, there's been a cure for cancer, and I actually have a link to the National Cancer Institute, the NIH, at thesecretteachings.info, where they just recently updated their page on cancer cures, and they say that cannabis, marijuana, is actually a cure for many forms of cancer in the sense that it not only relieves pain, but it can actually reduce the size of tumors. It can basically just simply cure cancer. And when you look at the illegal drugs in this country, Brad, tobacco is completely legal, yet it causes roughly 46 times more deaths than all illegal drugs do combined. Prescription drugs, which you've already mentioned, your dermatologist wanted to put you on because you did research for yourself and you found out what condition you actually had and ways to cure it. Prescription drugs cause twice as many deaths, and these are legally prescribed. Legally prescribed and properly taken prescription drugs cause twice as many deaths as all illegal drugs, including heroin, including marijuana, including crack cocaine, all illegal drugs combined. Now, when you look at numbers like that, and you look at the number of people, roughly 50% of people in this country, in the United States of America, are arrested for marijuana possession. And a higher percentage of that happen to be black. And so specifically that race is targeted amongst all others, which is part of a much larger underlying type of eugenics agenda targeting minority groups. But the simple fact that we spend billions and billions of dollars to put people in jail for having a couple grams of marijuana when it is proven to cure cancer and so many other forms of illness shows you who really is sick and mentally ill, Brad. And it's not people like you. It's not people like me. It's the people out there, these drug companies, that keep it legal through their lobbying and bureaucratic processes just to make a little bit more money.
Yeah, you got that right. And just to add to that, in my book, Modern Esoteric, I have a chapter in the control section called The Unhealth Industry. And just to go down the list of other possible cures for cancer, how about apricot seeds? They're now outlawed. You can't get apricot seeds.
Brad, that's because there's cyanide and it's poisonous.
Right, except that I just posted a story on Esoteric Book Series on Facebook about, no, actually it was in Sacred Places 108 Destinations on Facebook, about a tribe in Pakistan way up in the mountains. They live off of apricots, and they never have had cancer, never had tumors, not a single one of them. They all eat apricots every day. So it's the B17 vitamin that is of the apricot seed origin, which is now outlawed. It's just a vitamin. Vitamins are food. Apricots are food. So every time you get a holistic, natural, inexpensive health remedy like I found with the magnets, under $30, by the way, including shipping, is a cure to Morgellons. Countless hundreds, even into the thousands I've spent on the bogus cures that they've been offering to me, and probably acted more to facilitate the spread of the Morgellons rather than knock it out.
Exactly, which is what chemotherapy does by destroying tissue that's not affected. It destroys that tissue and allows for the cancer cells to spread. I mean, it's just like you said, the American Cancer Society is not anti-cancer. It's just the Cancer Society. It's about finding new ways to spread cancer. I mean, people have been so conditioned, and I think the average person is very, lenient and very trustworthy. So when the doctor says we need to give you this vaccination to keep you healthy, you say okay. And then when they say we need to give your kids 2, you say okay. And then when the CDC recommends that your kids get 30 or 40 vaccinations in the first couple of years of their life before the immune system is able to even develop, most parents say, okay. And if someone like you, Brad, tells a young mother or a father that, maybe you should look into the details and what's in these vaccines, and you'll see that maybe you shouldn't get your kid vaccinated, which obviously in California, it's mandatory now. And these people react as if you're attacking their parenting, you're attacking their child, and they act in defense of the so-called experts who have the white lab coats on. And see, the thing that really bothers me, we'll take a break here in a second. The thing that really bothers me, Brad, is that over time you see a slow progression where these medical companies, these vaccination producers, as one example, are able to influence the government and the regulatory bodies that are supposed to regulate them to an extent where we've even had laws passed in the 80s, and even recently Obama signed a new law where vaccine companies are not responsible for the effects of the vaccine. Why would they need a law if the vaccines don't cause any problems? Why would they need to make it mandatory if the vaccines that are given out to children prevent more illness from spreading? Why does everybody need to get vaccinated? And now they're talking in California, Governor Jerry Brown is talking about vaccinating or making it mandatory to vaccinate all parents, all adults as well. And I think that is part of the slow process to eventually roll it out across the rest of the country. At some point you have to sit back and just, swallow your ego and admit that there is obviously an agenda, and a lot of it is big pharma. A lot of it is all about big money. It's just, I think that the one common sense issue to me, Brad, more than anything, is the more vaccines we have, the more medications we have, the sicker we seem to be. We spend more money in this country on health than any other country in the world, and yet we're the sickest. It's not a matter of coincidence. It's planned to be that way because it's a money-making industry.
Yeah, and the new law about vaccines, mandatory in the state, actually will not go into effect for one more year, and there's already incredible amount of blowback. In fact, the state senator who introduced the bill is now facing a recall in his district because so many people are pissed off about this.
And they should
now
be.
Jerry Brown saying adults as well. Well, this gives new meaning to the concept of non-compliance. And this is how we can fight the system. And this is how we actually have a way of through our actions, or in this case non-actions of non-compliance, being nonviolent and not going out and saying firebombing a vaccine company. We can't win that way. That's the war, fire versus fire, that
feeds
they'll
the
win
beast
every time. Yeah, it's just like the coming police state. What are you going to do? Fight them? They'll massacre you. No. So the one thing we do is what Gandhi did, is non-compliance. And he told his followers, who told their friends and family, don't buy anything British, boycott the British. And then through other acts of nonviolence, what happened? A whole movement freed India of the British rule, and now it's the largest democracy in the world. So small things like non-compliance actually have a big effect, and that's certainly how I'm going to react when they say you got to come in and get your mandatory vaccine. Oh, missed the appointment.
Oops.
Sorry, can't make it.
And
Just keep blowing it off, and then let's just hope cooler minds prevail and figure this out. And through all the studies and tests and children coming down with autism, that people will say enough's enough. And Jerry Brown, he's going to be out of office in a year and a half, and maybe by then another candidate will step up and say, I'm anti-vaccine and I'm going to overthrow this law. And he probably would win just on that platform.
I would love to see that as more people become informed. Obviously, you can't have every political candidate or every person aware of every issue, but that doesn't mean that, when I sit here or when you sit there, when you write books, when I write books, that doesn't mean that we're all knowing either. We're just pulling this information in from so many different avenues, putting it together to make it easy for people to just have a book or to have a radio show, a podcast, to take it with them, listen to it, read it, express it by throwing it out there to other people, getting other people informed. And that's the only way that we can make a difference. And you're exactly right. I mean, the way that you shut down some of these big companies, especially when it comes to the food industry, and we're already seeing this happen as the industry has begun to change its image, even perceptually, is because people are not buying the products anymore. People are not buying products with certain ingredients because they're becoming aware of what they are, so the companies are... They're not necessarily taking the ingredients out. They'll just change the name to something else. But the fact is that shows you how much power the people actually have. And that's one of the ways, by not supporting these companies, not supporting the politicians, not supporting those who act in your ill interest. And that's where you have to stand up as an individual. You have to make the conscious decision that you are going to take responsibility for your own life and stop letting other people make those decisions for you, because they can provide you with this bread and circus entertainment culture that just keeps you numb from having to take any responsibility. Not to mention they've tricked people so much, Brad, into thinking that, again, freedom is slavery, war is peace, and ignorance is strength. So we're going to take a short break here. We're speaking with Brad Olsen. His website, Brad Olsen, it's Olsen, bradolsen.com, esotericseries.com. He's got multiple books out there, including World Stoppers and the Esoteric Series, Future Esoteric, The Unseen Realms, and Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses. And when we come back, we'll be speaking more with Brad about so many different issues we face as a species. And I also wanted to talk to him a little bit more about the medical industry in particular, something that's been on my mind recently. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Our website is thesecretteachings.info. Stay tuned.
How can we so arrogantly believe that we are at the very cutting edge of human and social evolution? How can we truly understand ourselves when we dilute our very nature with distractions that only seem to entertain rather than educate the human brain and mind? If you wish to explore these concepts and much more, you can tune into The Secret Teachings, Sundays at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the L&M Radio Network. You can also download and listen to past episodes for free by visiting our website, www.thesecretteachings.info. Remember that the highest wisdom is silent fact, and that wisdom is not bestowed, it is achieved.
Open Eyes seeks out the heart of matters, looking for explanations in places that most other radio hosts refuse to go. No subject is forbidden, and nothing remains hidden. Listen to Open Eyes on the Late Night in the Midlands Radio Network, weekdays from 7 to 9 p.m. Open minds, open hearts, open eyes.
Hi, this is Brad Olsen, author of the Esoteric book series, and you are listening to The Secret Teachings with Ryan Gable.
That pharmacist have to be 2.5 feet higher than everybody else? Who the hell is this guy? Clear out, everybody. I'm working with pills up here. I'm taking them from this big bottle, and then I'm going to put them in a little bottle. That's my whole job. I can't be down on the floor with you people.
This country is more obsessed about its health than any other country on earth. We're completely obsessed about our health. We're obsessed so much about our health that we worry about it. And when you worry about your health, you're going to get sick, aren't you?
Doctors always want your pants off. Take your pants off. Doctor would like to see you with no pants. Just get them off. It's my head. I said take your pants off.
I flew back from Los Angeles, and on the plane was a Time magazine. And there was a 30-page article about diabetes. And I read every page. And by the time that plane landed, I had diabetes. And for all we study about health, we know nothing.
Just once I'd like to say to the doctor, you know what? I'm not ready for you yet.
For the last time, I'm pretty sure what's killing the crops is this Brondo stuff.
The Brondo's got what plants crave. It's got electrolytes.
So wait a minute. What you're saying is that you want us to put water on the crops.
Yes. The plants aren't growing. So I'm pretty sure that the Brondo's not working. Now, I'm no botanist, but I do know that if you put water on plants, they grow. Why don't we just try it, okay? And not worry about what plants crave.
Brondo's got what plants crave.
Yeah, it's got electrolytes. What are electrolytes? Do you even know?
It's what they use to make Brondo.
That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant.
There also exists an extraordinary opportunity to form for the first time in history a truly global society. Will be the emergence of a new international order.
To lead in shaping a new world order for the 21st century.
We meet here at a moment of testing for Europe and the United States, and for the international order that we have worked for generations to build.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.
I sense that the federal government has taken over. You know, there was one time I threw out the term, there's been a CIA coup. It's a secret government. We don't know what they do. The Congress doesn't know what they do. They rig elections. They start wars.
We cannot continue to rely only on our military in order to achieve the national security objectives that we've set. We've got to have a civilian national security force that's just as powerful, just as strong, just as well-funded.
President Bush signed a formal agreement that will end the United States as we know it. And he took the step without approval from either the U.S. Congress or the people of the United States.
In order to ensure the security and continuing prosperity, the Republic will be reorganized into the first galactic empire for a safe and secure society.
So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
Gentlemen, we have called you together to inform you that we are going to overthrow the United States government. You still think that jet fuel brought down the World Trade Center? Does anybody else see a problem here? If the government has nothing to hide, why are they so afraid to answer a few questions? This story does not add up.
Welcome back to The Secret Teachings. I'm your host, Ryan Gable. Our website is www.thesecretteachings.info. On the website, you will find a full list of all of our past episodes that you can download or stream for free. You will also find a top news tab with all of the news articles, or at least links to those news articles that we discuss on the program every week, including what we were talking about in the past segment with Brad Olsen, different cures for cancer on the National Cancer Institute website. And there's also a bunch of different news articles up there, including the one that I wrote about the Planned Parenthood eugenics agenda, a little bit of a history of Planned Parenthood, as well as the underlying agenda of the selling of the aborted fetal tissue, which I didn't get a chance to get into with Brad to get his take on yet, but I do have a question for him here in a moment. But before we get to that, we were talking about empowerment and taking responsibility for yourself, your family, and not having to rely on somebody else to do it for you. Isn't that right, Brad?
Well, absolutely. And when we realize that we are our own master and only we can make the best decisions in our best interest and don't believe everything that we're being told, do we start making changes in our lives? And one of those changes we were talking about was non-compliance. And before the break, after you made your statement, I wanted to add that there is a brand new fast food restaurant up here in Northern California in the town called Rohnert Park that just opened called Amy's Drive-Thru. And it's based on the same company that produces Amy's frozen food without any preservative, all natural ingredients.
And they try to be non-GMO, right?
And non-GMO, absolutely. And we don't see that in many other fast food restaurants. Well, the people have responded, and Amy's Drive-Thru in Rohnert Park is a whopping success. There are lines out the door every single day. Meanwhile, McDonald's continues to close stores worldwide. They and other fast food restaurants just don't seem to get it, that people are moving away from meat, moving away from GMOs, moving away from preservatives in their food because they're better informed. And this is the part of non-compliance that I think really illustrates well how we can all make these decisions in our lives. And it's more than just the food we eat, but it's whether or not we're going to accept a vaccine. It's whether or not we want high doses of radiation pumped into our body because some doctor tells us that's the only way to kill cancer. There's always other options, and people have to know that. Don't just do something because a so-called professional tells you to. Do your own research, look into it in every different way, and then make an informed decision what you want to do.
That's right. You have to take the responsibility for yourself. People like Brad Olsen, he just helps to facilitate that kind of spiritual conscious awakening. Would you say that's correct?
Absolutely, and it's really just service to others. I think it's very important when you care about other people, when you have empathy and compassion for the human race, and that's why when I am sure about this Morgellons cure with magnets, I'm going to become a very big advocate for people to try this out.
I mean, and then for under $30 too, why not?
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, the magnets are useful in other purposes too. And the more I read about magnet therapy, the more I find out there are other benefits. For example, migraine headaches, which I do not suffer from, but I understand that magnets can actually help people that do suffer from migraines.
I would assume, is it because of the metals in the blood and the restriction of blood vessels in the brain?
Well, remember when we were kids how fun it was to play with magnets, how you could get a magnet and just pick up a whole bunch of pins, and you learn about the positive flow of energy. And magnets are such a cool teaching ploy, and I'm just glad to play around with them again to just see how they attract and can detract amongst themselves, and just to emphasize what I was saying about how they help with Morgellons. It's the negative attraction when the magnets are actually repulsed from each other, that is what is the thing that fries the circuitry. Because on the MorgellonsCure.com website, I neglected to mention this, he shows in a couple videos about a Morgellon fiber in a petri dish, how it actually tries to escape from magnetism. So when you zap it from both sides with this negative magnetism, it just explodes the circuitry, and then it just becomes debris that the body can easily get rid of.
It reminds me of the first Matrix movie when they pick Neo up in the car and they suck that robotic tracking device out of him, and then they shock it and it fries the circuits.
You know, isn't it funny how art imitates life so many times? And to some degrees, I think they have to reveal what their plans are. Maybe they even relish in it a little bit.
I think so.
And this even goes into the exopolitics, into the ET side of things, that there are universal laws, such as the Prime Directive that we know through Star Trek, but is actually a real law that if you're going to be interfering, well, first of all, you shouldn't interfere at all, and that's why the benevolent ETs are staying away, or at least just monitoring us until we do something really terrible like nuclear war. And then they've made it clear that that won't be allowed to happen. But in the case of the malevolent ETs, those who are service to self, they seem to have this control over the other elite who are service to self, who have control over the media, who do little implants of information here and there to reveal their real game plan. And it seems like this has to do with the Prime Directive, that if you're going to get people to kill themselves by eating GMOs or taking vaccines, you have to give them the real information to make them choose not to. And this is the real paradox of free will that we all have. And this is something that's very unique to the human species, because we are not of a collective mind. And a lot of people would think, well, collective mind hive, that would be sort of along the lines, certainly of the Greys, maybe even of the Reptoids, that you have to follow along, that it is this Orwellian world where we're all just robots and any nail that sticks up gets hammered down. But in reality, free will is not only our best friend, but our worst enemy. It's good for us because we can make these decisions to not go along with what everybody says, as we were just talking about nonconformity. And it is our own worst enemy because we can get caught up into the groupthink and fall prey to the propaganda giving us misinformation. So this is another reason why it is so terribly important for people to be independent thinkers right now, to do as much homework as they can, and to make informed decisions on everything they do in life.
Brad, I have a question for you about that energy that you mentioned. Maybe I can get your take on this, a new type of perspective. Obviously, all of the listeners out there, you guys have been following my work and my steady dedication, even being kicked off of Dark Matter, to this international network of child abusers, child trafficking, human trafficking, and, of course, the exposing of Planned Parenthood before these videos even came out. And I did that in my first book, The Grand Illusion, got into more details about it in the second book, False Prophets and the Lovers of Children. So, Brad, I wanted to ask you about this Planned Parenthood scandal. I know you haven't researched much into it, but it's more of an energy question. It turns out that PepsiCo, the company, has been using, up until a couple of years ago, human fetal tissue or aborted fetal cells in the flavoring of their beverage products. The company Kraft, right? It's disgusting. Kraft and Nestle has also been using aborted fetal cells in the flavoring of their products. They all three, along with I'm sure many other companies that weren't exposed, partnered with another company called Cinemix, just like Planned Parenthood was partnered with Stem Express and some other laboratories. Pepsi, Kraft, and Nestle, they partnered with Cinemix, and they used aborted fetal tissue, specifically from kidney cells, to flavor their food and their beverages. Now, you might say, well, where would they get aborted fetal tissue from? Well, we've seen that with Planned Parenthood now, and in the Planned Parenthood case, the cells that are being extracted from the brain and the central nervous system. They're called glial cells or glial cells, and the cells that were being used from the kidneys in the food and the beverage products are called diploid cells, diploid. So, Brad, with all of this being put into the food system, as well as the diploid cells that are put into vaccinations, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that or know much about it, but on an energy level, if we're consuming these aborted babies, essentially, how much does that affect negatively the energy of the species, the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, and of Earth as a whole, as a living Mother Gaia, if you will? How does that factor in?
Well, Ryan, I read your article just before we went on, and I have to applaud you for such a great job. And your research is amazing for a man your age to have the wisdom you have is truly commendable, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Brad.
And just from your what you're saying about all this, and you mentioned it in your article as well, it is Soylent Green. We're coming into that age. And it's funny that movie takes place only 5 years in the future.
That was in the 70s that came out.
Isn't that amazing? And that how so many of these things are now coming out, such as the fetal tissue being used for food and other resources that are of a very dark nature. Just, wow. Just another very strange coincidence or life imitating art example of how Soylent Green may very well be our future if it isn't already.
Do you think this type of ritualistic cannibalism, negatively affects consciousness?
Oh, of course it does. No doubt about it. And then, again, if we put the aliens in the middle of this stuff to get all the answers, like Bill Cooper said, if you go into the exopolitics side of this, the reptoids live off of us. They feed off of humans. They view us as cattle, and this very much plays right into their agenda because we're just livestock to them. So if we can get ourselves to treat ourselves as livestock, as these fetuses have been used, then that's their agenda, and we're playing right into it. So again, our free will is we are accepting this dark agenda if we continue to go along with it.
Well, that's exactly right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And well, just that if we are given the information correctly, and how this whole thing came up through the alternative media once again, and we're given the correct information to make decisions whether or not we want to, say, for example, drink a Pepsi ever again in our lives, knowing what we know, then that is how we use our free will to our benefit. And that's how sticking to our guns and being free thinkers and independent researchers can very much come to our aid. And this is what I said in my book, Modern Esoteric, is that this information could very well not only save your life, but make you much healthier and smarter and live longer. And I am a living proof of that with what I've found now recently with Morgellons, that indeed there is an agenda. Indeed, the best doctors don't know anything about magnets to heal, let alone light or sound or frequency like Royal Raymond Rife developed. These are things that are going to help us tremendously if we can push the agenda forward to allow them to be treated. You can go down to Mexico. By the way, if anybody is ever diagnosed with cancer, do not get radiation treatment because the Rife machine won't help you anymore. You have to go in there with cancer untreated, and then these machines are available in Mexico, and my understanding is the success rate is almost 100% perfect.
Well, look at the medical industry. The doctors that perform surgeries and prescribe medications is the third leading cause of death in the United States, only behind heart disease and cancer. And cancer is only a real big killer because of the issuance of supposed remedies from the medical community. So really, the medical industry, Brad, is the number one and number two killer of everybody that dies in this country from some type of medical-related illness. I mean, that is unbelievable. You mentioned this in your book, actually, in the chapter Unhealth Industry. You talked about that Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, that was published in 2005. There's another one in the year 2000 that was published showing the unnecessary surgery deaths, properly prescribed medication. Over 220,000 people a year died from properly prescribed medications, 80,000 dead due to infections in the care of hospitals. 20,000 people die from just simple errors in a hospital, 12,000 from unnecessary surgery. The medical industry is in the top 3 for the biggest killer in the United States. If that doesn't deter you away from conventional types of treatment, I don't know, maybe you deserve the chemotherapy.
Yeah. get what we deserve sometimes, and uninformed people will make those bad decisions because you go into a hospital and you get this terrible news that a loved one has cancer. Not only are the treatments fraudulent, but healthcare bills are the number one leading cause of bankruptcies in this country too. So even with this whole Obamacare, we still haven't figured out a way to insulate people's personal finance from being totally wiped out if a loved one has some kind of medical emergency.
Right, so some of those cancer drugs that cost over $100,000 a year for just a couple of pills, literally, for a couple of pills from some company that is saying that this is an experimental type of drug. We're not sure if it's going to work. And even saying we're not sure if it's going to work, it's an experiment, it still costs you your house and your lifestyle just to try the medication. And most of the time, personally, I don't think that it's any more than a placebo. It's just a big freaking scam. I wanted to go back because we're coming up on the last half hour here. For what we've been talking about today on the program, we started out with Morgellons. We talked about transhumanism a little bit and Agenda 21, vaccinations, food, water, this underlying eugenics genocide agenda. And you mentioned that you read the article I wrote about Planned Parenthood, and it's available at thesecretteachings.info. It's called the Planned Parenthood Eugenics Agenda. There's some very graphic videos from these abortion clinics on there just so everybody is aware. But as Martin Luther King said, until people see racism, they won't really understand it. And until people see what's happening in these abortion clinics, you really won't understand it or appreciate the severity of the situation. So you should probably watch some of the videos at least once. But we were talking about these diploid cells that come from aborted fetal tissue and kidney cells. This was many years before the Planned Parenthood scandal broke, Brad. And they're put in vaccinations, and PepsiCo, Nestle, these companies use them in the food and beverage products, and they say that they've removed them. The glial cells that are now taken from the aborted fetal tissue, specifically from the central nervous system and the brain, the neurons in the brain, are being inserted into mice. And when they're inserting these into mice brains, they're finding that the mice gain almost twice the intelligence. They become twice as intelligent with the insertion of these cells. Now, personally, I see that as part of an underlying transhuman agenda, and also with places like Plum Island and places we've heard about with Nightmare Hall, whether that's associated with extraterrestrials or not, is maybe the breeding of a type of dehumanized human/animal hybrid being that has no rights and is able to just be a type of worker drone in a Elysium-type society where a breakaway civilization may not even live on this planet anymore, and humans as we know it have been essentially wiped out as we see this eradication process taking place. But what are your thoughts on that? I know that's a lot of information, but initial thoughts.
My initial thoughts is, wow, Brian, you beat me to my research revelation, which is going to come out in my third esoteric book called Beyond Esoteric, in which I very much take on the entire transhumanist agenda, including what we are going to become. And this is where it gets kind of weird, because what appears to be our future is the human race separating into two different, distinct species. Human, sapien sapien, will continue on, will get better, will be enhanced, will continue to look and be the way we are. But another human branch is going to begin, if it hasn't already, called Human Evolutus. And this is going to be the hybrid species of humans that are being mixed with the DNA of gray-like aliens below ground in the Dulce, New Mexico facility, deep underground, and other genetic experiment places where these beings are being created. And they're going to have bigger heads and bigger eyes, and indeed, way down the line, will become the species of planet Earth. And in my book, Future Esoteric, I quoted a researcher named Dan Burish, who actually had an ET that they called J-Rod, and you could look him up and watch his interviews on YouTube, where he talks about his interaction with this gray-like species called J-Rod. And J-Rod made the great reveal that he was not from another planet. He was not from some faraway galaxy. He was us from the future coming back. And then this ties into the whole concept of space and time and how we are able to teletransport not only off planet to other places, but along the time track of time. And so J-Rod came back to basically encourage us to continue on this trajectory, because that would be his own very survival of the species, and that human Homo evolutus is going to be the fate of planet Earth, whether we like it or not. And I don't think it can be stopped at this point.
Well,
mainly because, we have J-Rod coming from the future to tell us he's one of them, and they go on and do different things that will affect our timeline along the line. But two, it's come to the point where there are actually hundreds, perhaps thousands of these species that are already alive and living below base. As incredible as this may sound, it is very much in the realm of feasible, because look, we cloned Dolly the sheep about 20 or 30 years ago, so cloning technology should not come as a surprise to anyone. And then if you mix it with some of the high technology of some of the ET species,
genetic engineering,
absolutely, that science fiction is now science fact, and it is possible to do this kind of thing.
It absolutely is, and I mean, it touches on a much broader agenda, as we've been discussing tonight, and as obviously you discuss in great detail in Future Esoteric, Modern Esoteric, and I think you said you're going to go into a lot of detail about transhumanism in the next book, right?
Yes, Beyond Esoteric.
Beyond Esoteric. So yes. That will be the third book, and that's actually something I find very interesting, that's kind of the premise, the synopsis of the third book. And I was telling Jim Marrs this last week, not that I'm working with you, not that I'm working with Jim Marrs, not that you're working with Jim Marrs, but there are hundreds of radio hosts, hundreds of writers, bloggers, authors, who I think are sort of feeling this conscious awakening inside of themselves. And I find it so interesting that one day, Brad, about 3 months ago, I just had this really bad headache, a really bad pounding in my head, and it's kind of like a very, very straightforward type of OCD is obviously what the doctors would call it. But I just had all of these compulsions to write these ideas down, and as I started to do it, I thought, I've got to write another book. So I started to do that, and as the book started to come together, the main premise of the book is basically what we're discussing tonight, and it gets into transhumanism, population control, and eugenics, and it touches on all of the subjects that we ever talk about here on The Secret Teachings. And then I talked to Jim Marrs, and I wasn't even aware that he had a new book out until I emailed him a couple months ago, and he told me about the new book, and boom, it was about the same subject matter I had just written about. I had Karen Dahlman on the program 2 weeks ago, who wrote the new book about alchemy. And she said the exact same thing. Just a couple of months ago, basically, she started having these feelings, and over a year ago when she started writing this book, and it turned out to be the exact same type of topics that I covered in my new book, and now you're telling me that these are the same types of topics that you're covering in your new book. I don't see that as a coincidence. I see some type of spiritual awakening, some type of conscious revolution.
This is one of the biggest stories that is completely underreported, or I should say misreported, because anytime we hear any mention of the word transhumanism, we might think of who's the guy at Google now who talks about this. Boy, his name's escaping me. He basically, and I've seen him lecture. Oh, Ray Kurzweil. Kurzweil, who now is head of technology or something like that down here at Google, and lives right here on the peninsula in the Bay Area, says it's going to be such a great thing that the computers are going to match humans in intellect by 2030, how AI is going to be our great savior and make our lives so convenient, and humans aren't going to have much to do anymore but just live the good life of recreation.
I think they made a movie about that, and one of your past governors was in it.
Yeah, that's right. Called Terminator. But hey, if we can go back to robotics and AI, just remember that Ray Bradbury or Isaac Asimov wrote about the laws of robotry, and the number one rule was robots would never be allowed to harm humans. Well, guess what? We've already crossed over that threshold, because now there are drones that are armed that are not run by humans anymore, that are just flying overhead, say in Yemen or some of these hot zones, and if they pick up the identity or some kind of signature of a combatant, that they can now fire on their own.
It's autonomous.
We've just passed that threshold. So now we are coming into the age of AI, of robots, and they're armed and they're dangerous. So this is the kind of brave new world that we're entering into, and it's doesn't give me much sense of optimism unless we start having a mass awakening now, because there might not be much time left to counter these forces that are bringing this into the world.
I want people to be aware that when we talk about these subjects, look at other stories in the news and see how this all ties together, how it all comes together. If you look at the pharmaceutical industry and psychotropic drugs, look at people like James Holmes, the Aurora movie theater shooter. He was working with the concepts of time, the concepts of consciousness, and he was doing a lot of his research on grants from the government at the Salk Institute in San Diego. Now, the Salk Institute had a partner at that time. The partner was DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which the head of DARPA actually moved over to Google in the last couple of years. And DARPA is the same government agency working with the Pentagon and ties to the National Security Agency, as well as the Department of Homeland Security, for which Adam Lanza, the Newtown shooter, his mom was working within the Pentagon, within the CIA, and within DARPA. DARPA has contracted Boston Dynamics, which is a robot company. They manufacture robots, and they've created these robots called the Big Dog. Have you seen the Big Dog robot?
I have indeed. It's scary. I wouldn't want to bump into that in the woods.
So they're manufacturing these robots. They're implementing autonomous type artificial intelligence in, as you mentioned, the drones. They want to put this in the robots, and of course, it's all done under the guise of safety and the guise of security, making the battlefield more safe, taking human lives out of the equation. And as we've been talking about, as you've mentioned twice now, we talked about Soylent Green and The Matrix, how art imitates reality. And many people think reality imitates art, which it can, but when Soylent Green came out in the 1970s, the whole movie was based on climate change and like an engineered environment, using human beings as food. It's just something that would be crazy at that time, and now it's all come true as we lead up to the year that fictional type movie took place. The Matrix is the same thing. The Terminator, same thing. So when you look at one part of this agenda, just transhumanism, you can see how through companies such as DARPA, Boston Dynamics, and the Pentagon tie that even into HAARP that can control the weather, earthquakes, and look at what the Goddard Space Agency found above the epicenter of the earthquake off the coast of Japan before the Fukushima plant just went up in smoke. They found an artificial heating of the ionosphere, which is the part of the atmosphere that HAARP affects, or other facilities around the world. So all of this ties in together, and obviously because of the super soldier programs that were being worked on through DARPA, you have that connection through the psychotropic drugs and the big pharma industries with people like James Holmes and people like Adam Lanza, the mass shooters for which we need to take away people's guns because we need to make sure the society once again is safer and more secure. But it's never about safety and security. It's about selling you that idea of war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. Brad, doesn't it seem to you the more security we have, the more unsafe and dangerous society seems to be. That's what it seems like to me. I don't know.
Well, it's just like the Orwellian newspeak that you just quoted. Everything really is in reverse. So Homeland Security is Homeland Insecurity. The Patriot Act is the most unpatriotic thing I could think of. The NDAA, which was signed by Obama on New Year's Eve when everybody was out partying, took away our rights to a fair trial that could put us in jail indefinitely without ever seeing a judge. And right before our very eyes, you're seeing the Constitution and the Bill of Rights
shredded,
just shredded. And it's just like the blacked out text from a classified document. That's what the Constitution and the Bill of Rights looks like these days. There are very few that are even left. And wait till the censorship comes to the internet. There goes the First Amendment right. I mean, already Dianne Feinstein spoke up against what is really a journalist. Who's qualified to be a journalist? And that journalists can actually be classified as enemy combatants. That, yeah, we're just talking the truth, yet we could be considered terrorists and rounded up. So everything is reversed now, and this is what really scares me. And the longer they can dummy down the population before we get mad enough to say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it. When everybody rises up, well, then the game's over. So that's why we're saturated with so much meaningless celebrity gossip and car crashes and chases that really don't mean anything. Of course, people are struggling and there's crime in the world, but you don't hear them talking about the subjects that we're talking about tonight. That's why these are the secret teachings, Ryan.
That's right, Brad. That reminds me of Bill Hicks when he was talking about he turns on the TV and it's rape and violence and stabbings and murders and blood and gore and warfare, and then he says, I look out my window, and then he did like a cricket noise, and he said, I'm wondering, where the hell's all this taking place? Yeah, bad things happen in the world, but the world is also a wonderful, wonderful place where amazing things happen. So by focusing on that negativity 100% of the time, or even even a fraction of the time, it begins to breed more negativity, it begins to breed more destruction, and you start to experience the reality for which you are perceptually turning your senses to, whether that's in the media, entertainment, whatever you're focused on, that becomes your reality. So the people focused so much in the digital realm are actually becoming, in a way, digitized. We've seen IQs drop. We've seen Microsoft did a study. They showed that our attention span as a species has dropped to 7 seconds, below that of a goldfish. Not only are we being dehumanized, we're being de-evolved, and I think that's part of this transhumanism agenda, the terraforming of the planet, and perhaps that ET presence that both of us have spoke about. Now, on that issue, we've got about 15 minutes left here, Brad. I have 2 questions/topics/comments from listeners that I wanted to get your take on, because I know one of these in particular you wrote about, and then we'll go ahead and I'll give you the floor if you have anything else you'd like to add, what you might have going on in the future or very soon here. So the first thing that I have for you, Brad, is an email I got talking about RH blood type, or RH negative blood type, and that in relation to abductions, be that governmental black operations or extraterrestrials, and this being a different species maybe. What are your thoughts on that? I think you've written that in one of your books.
Yeah, absolutely. I sure have. The chapter of Blood of the Gods in Modern Esoteric. And it just so happens that I come from an RH negative family. And I think your listener was referring to the RH negative people, who are only 15% of the world population of humans are RH negative, and they are close to 100% of those who are abducted. So this may very well have a tie-in to this splitting of humanity, this Homo evolutus, new type of human that is being created in genetic laboratories that may, and I would not be surprised whatsoever, although I don't have any information on this, may very well be all RH negatives. Because what RH negative means is it's a blood type that has no rhesus monkey blood gene whatsoever in it. It's pure of, say, the natural way that humans had. I don't even think it's evolved from apes anymore. I think it's more like genetically spliced from apes. But that all the bloodline families are also Rh negative, and they take this very seriously. And you cannot just marry into some of these elite families. You have to be selected. So this is a topic that I've pitched to Ancient Aliens, which in my opinion is one of the smoking guns to enhance their theory. But as of yet, they have not contacted me about doing this on one of the shows.
Well, you also wrote in the chapter "Blood of the Gods." I've got the book "Modern Esoteric" right here. Fantastic, fantastic book. And you wrote about pregnancies, and you said that a mother who is Rh negative and the father is Rh positive, there can be a tragic outcome. What is that tragic outcome, Brad?
Well, that happened in my family when my grandmother, who was Rh negative, had a second child with my grandfather, who was Rh positive, and this baby was going to be Rh positive, and his blood mixed with my grandmother's upon birth, and he died 5 days later. They called him a blue blood baby because when the blood mixes, it's actually a toxin. Now, I want to remind you that this does not happen in any of the other animal species on Earth, only humans. So this is, again, what I would consider a smoking gun, that there are two kinds of humans.
Two species,
on this planet.
Yes.
In a way, we can mix. My family mixed, and it's okay. And we actually now have modern technology that what happened to my Uncle Douglas would not happen anymore, and they can solve the problem of these blue blood babies. But nevertheless, we still have this great enigma here on Earth that people really don't know much about, that there are two types of blood going through all our veins.
That's pretty incredible, and it reminds me, again, of everything we've been talking about, and a quote that I've used several times in the past month from a eugenicist named Bertrand Russell. He says that, quote, diet, injections, and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable, and any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible, end quote. I think we've already experienced that. The second part, he says, quote, gradually, by selective breeding, the congenial differences between rulers and ruled will increase until they become almost different species, end quote. And I think that's really what we're experiencing. We are experiencing a set of rulers, and then us as the ruled, a Elysium-type breakaway civilization society.
Yeah, and we're seeing it now with so many things that we talked about on the show. There's no reason to repeat them, but I read that article, or your article with that Bertrand Russell quote, and that just floored me. I'm going to have to borrow that if you don't mind.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a great one. And it shows that this goes back at least 100 years or more, this eugenic agenda to not only transform humanity like a sculptor works with clay and makes the perfect art piece, in this case making the perfect human, but it will fail miserably because it's not what the Creator intended for us. You can do this, and you can make human evolutus, but my understanding with these hybrids in these underground bases, they're having a very hard time keeping these entities alive, mainly because souls of the human stock do not want to attach to these clones. So they're soulless beings, although they were trying to make them carry a soul, it's very difficult. So I think in the end it may be a failure, but then when I look at the research and information from Dan Burish talking to J-Rod, that these beings are alive in our future, hundreds and perhaps thousands of years from now, maybe it's inevitable that it's going to happen this way.
Next question I have from the listeners, and it's a question that was proposed to me, so I'm going to propose it to you. You've done a lot of research, especially here in modern esoteric, about GMOs and food additives. I've quoted your book several times in my new book, The Persistent Illusion, which will be out in a couple of months. And I had a listener ask me about animal food, and if animal food is tampered with in the same way human food is.
You mean what we're feeding to livestock?
Well, not necessarily what we're feeding to livestock, but what we're feeding to our pets, dogs, cats, birds. I don't know if you know anything about that.
Well, certainly the pets have some of the best positions in the animal kingdom as they relate to humans, unless, of course, those animals are completely out in the wild and unmolested. But look at the way our animals are treated in these feedlots, that pigs and chickens never even see the light of day. They're pumped up with antibiotics. They're fed all these GMO foods. They're eating stuff they normally should never eat, like cows eating corn. Cows never ate corn. Cows graze. And as far as what they're putting in pet food, well, there have been a couple exposés about some of the nasty parts of slaughterhouses going right into to animal food. And I do know that some of the fastest growing pet food companies are like this Amy's of Rohnert Park, the ones that are saying no GMO, only purest ingredients, and people are flocking over to that. So I think awareness is picking up in these regards, but there's still so much more that we need to do, and we have to be diligent. We really do, and this is a never-ending process because we know we're being tricked and lied to, and until we get to the meat of the matter, forgive the pun, can we ever really know these things for certain? And there's always going to be multiple viewpoints that we can look at, and I always love the M.C. Escher etching of the four people going up the four stairways. I included in the introduction and future esoteric, because which side is up? They all look like they're plausible, yet it's absolutely impossible that they could all be walking on four stairways that lead to another level that attach to the next stairway. So like an M.C. Escher etching, things are not as they appear, and we do appear to be living in this land of illusions. So to break through the illusions, to break through all the misinformation and lies that were being presented is a monumental task, and it's not easy. You continue to learn, and I continue to learn, and Jim Mars continues to learn these things, and it really is a lifetime process. And then even still, we're not seems like we're not even scratching the surface of all there is to know. But to just end on one point, and you said earlier about how people can get really run down by this stuff and how the world is such a beautiful place. I do like to try to end my talks with this point, and that is absolutely correct. We have such abundance and beauty and so many things to live for, despite the fact that all these things are happening in the world today. Try to be happy. Try to be happy every day. Try to be around people that make you laugh. Try not to let this stuff weigh you down, because it could take you down a dark hole that you may not come out of, or become very depressed if you think about it too much. Get out in nature. Enjoy yourself. Do the real simple things in life, like taking a walk down a beach on a sunny day and jumping in the water, doing those things that make us feel human again. And I remember the book Megatrends I read in high school that came out in the 1980s, and he had a chapter called High Tech, High Touch. And that is, the more technologically advanced we become as a human species, the more important it is for us to touch one another, to touch the soil, to take our shoes off and walk in the grass, and do those things that humans have been doing since forever. And that's just being us, one with nature. And that's never going to go away. That's always going to be something that we can do unfortunately more people are turning away from it. I think now is the time we need to turn towards it.
I agree, and I know we're just about out of time, but on that subject, I hear a lot of times people say, well, what really makes me happy if I'm going to just live a happy life is smoking and eating fast food, and that's all I care about. So how much does that play energetically in with what you're saying, because you're still you're participating in this slow kill agenda, yet you might think that you're happy? I mean, I don't know. What do you think about that? I'm confused about that idea or that argument.
Well, surely they can do that, and that's free will. And we all have a choice of slow killing ourselves by choice. We also have the free will of putting a revolver to our head and ending it all. But
True.
That's not the human experience. That's not why we're here. And guess what? You're just going to have to reincarnate, and if you do kill yourself, in much less favorable circumstances than you have right now. So why don't you get it figured out right now and go back to doing those things that humans have done forever, and just enjoy nature, enjoy the company of other people, enjoy the little things in life that are pleasurable, eat a good healthy meal, drink a glass of red wine. They say it's good for you now. And just don't let these things weigh on you too much. I'm not saying ignore them. I'm just saying this stuff can really drag you down, and you have to be happy about these things and keep yourself immune in a way to the darker side of where these things are going.
So, Brad, I'll give you the floor here, a couple of minutes, if you'd like to let us know about anything else that you have going on, book plugs, websites. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we're sold out of the third printing of Future Esoteric, and I was going through it the last few weeks, reading all the chapters, updating a lot of information, and realizing I had enough to come out with a second edition. So Future Esoteric will come out as a second edition early next year, along with the release titles of Leo Lion Zagami, who just met Alex Jones when he was in Rome, and now Leo writes for InfoWars, and they have a big interview that they did in Vatican Square at St. Peter's Square that's meant to come out very soon. So very happy to see Leo getting the wide exposure he deserves. And, you and I, Ryan, we talked together. I wrote the foreword to your book, and when all's said and done, I may be your publisher in a future date too. So let's just keep the good work coming along. And if people want to find out more about the books that I publish, including my own, go to cccpublishing.com is one of the websites you didn't mention, but that's where people can see the books themselves through the Google Books app and read them online if they want to, or if they order through that site, they come through my office, and if they're one of my titles, I can sign it for the people and send it along to them that way. But otherwise, life is good, Ryan, and I'm trying to practice what I preach and not let life get me down. And in a little bit, I got a friend coming over, and we're going to go for a hike through Golden Gate Park and do that high-tech, high-touch.
Sounds good to me, brother. I'll tell you what, I try to do exactly what you're saying. I try to live and experience the world the way that I talk about it, in the awesomeness that is the natural beauty of this planet, and trying to focus on things that, even though I'm aware of all of the topics we've discussed today, and we're aware, as you put at the end of your books, more positive topics that bring more light to the world and people's lives. I try to do that at the end of every show, or at least every time I talk to somebody, I try to throw in one of those positive things. Not that the information's negative, but we, people like us, have to live the way that we're discussing. If we're talking about not eating genetically modified foods, then we probably shouldn't be eating genetically modified foods, or what does it even matter to talk about it? So with that being said, Brad Olsen, our guest/co-host today, and hopefully Brad will join me occasionally throughout the coming years as a de facto co-host on the program, because I very much enjoy having Brad on the program. Remember, his books are Future Esoteric, The Unseen Realms, and Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses. Those are the two books from the Esoteric series. He also has a new one coming out next year, right, Brad? Beyond Esoteric?
Well, Future Esoteric 2nd edition will be next year. Beyond's going to take me beyond next year, probably 2017.
So a couple of years from now.
Yes.
Something good to look forward to. In the meantime, my new book will be coming out towards the end of this year, and as Brad mentioned, he was nice enough to write me a couple-page forward for that. So his websites, again, cccpublishing.com, esotericseries.com, and bradolsen.com. I am Ryan Gable. Our website is www.thesecretteachings.info, and if you missed anything, you want more details on the subjects that we discussed today, you can go listen to all of our past shows for free. You can download or stream them on the website, thesecretteachings.info, the show archive, top news, and at the very top right of the page, a way to help support the show through donations. All donations over $20, and I will send you a PDF of my book, The Grand Illusion, Slaves to Perception. Any donations over $50, and I will send you my first 2 books, The Grand Illusion and False Prophets and The Lovers of Children. And when we come back, we will be talking more about current events as well as some other topics that I have slated for the 3rd hour. Brad, thank you so much. And all the listeners out there, we will be right back. Stay tuned.
Did you know that there are astonishing, what you may call coincidences, between the assassinations of 2 American presidents, John F. Kennedy and Abraham Lincoln? Consider the following. Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Lincoln was elected president in 1860. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. Lincoln's secretary was called Kennedy, and Kennedy's secretary was called Lincoln. Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth, was born in 1839, and Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged assassin of Kennedy, was born in 1939. Their successors were both called Johnson. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was born in 1808, while Lyndon Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908. They both attempted to end the oppressive reign of the Federal Reserve and print their own interest-free currency, and both presidents were murdered on a Friday in the presence of their wives and were both shot in the head. These were alternative facts brought to you by The Secret Teachings.
To understand is to perceive patterns. Now, of course, what this means is that true comprehension comes when the dots are revealed and you get Stephen Johnson's long view and you see the big picture. This is the idea about patterns, recurring patterns across different scales of reality. You know, Paul Stamets talks about the mycelial archetype and how the information sharing systems that comprise the internet look exactly like computer models of dark matter in the universe, look exactly like the neurons in the brain. They all share the same intertwinkle filamental structure. It's the rise of networkism as big data advocates talk about how man-made systems are looking exactly like natural systems. The more we can measure, the more we can visualize. The more we can visualize, the more it expands our consciousness by seeing these recurring patterns across scales of reality. It blows my mind, and I think that technology increasingly is becoming an expander of human consciousness. It extends our thought, reach, and vision, and revealing so much more. It's like, whereas once I was blind, now I can see. Jeffrey West from the Santa Fe Institute is telling us that cities are really like organisms. You know, alleys are like capillaries. How is it possible that a man-made artificial technological system is behaving like a natural system? The more efficient it becomes, the more it's starting to look like nature. Really interesting, weird stuff. You know, but it makes me optimistic. It's like when Stephen Johnson says, look, if we can understand all this stuff, we can, anything becomes possible, right? It's the adjacent possible, standing as a sort of shadow future, a map of all the ways the present can reinvent itself. It's beautiful stuff.
Hi, this is Brad Olsen, author of the Esoteric book series, and you are listening to The Secret Teachings with Ryan Gable.
TROLLS. This is a terrible new disorder being diagnosed every day. Victims of this disease have been found in psychologists, scientists, doctors, other people with letters and numbers behind their names, and anyone else who is in the world specifically to cause trouble. It stands for Totalitarian Regime Orchestrating Laughable Liar Syndrome, and is a terrible burden on anyone around those that have been diagnosed with this disease. Symptoms may include debunking all truths, diversion tactics, divisive talk, and flame war baiting, COINTELPRO tactics and maneuvers, and making rude and obnoxious comments even where such things are not warranted. You can help cure the problem by opening your eyes to the facts, speaking about this disorder to anyone you know, and not allowing their disease to influence your life. If you or someone you know has been diagnosed with trolls, please seek immediate assistance by going to latenightinthemidlands.com and listening to all of the shows that are available. Only you can prevent trolls. This message brought to you by IRA, the Independently Reporting Association. Thank you for your support.
They reach into our children in music, television, books.
They prey on children's innocence.
The FBI recently concluded a 7-year study and found little or no evidence of the existence of occult conspiracies.
And J. Edgar Hoover never admitted to the existence of the mafia.
Look, if the number of murders attributed to occult conspiracies were true, it would mean thousands of people killing tens of thousands of people a year without evidence, without being exposed. It would be the greatest criminal conspiracy in the history of civilization.
Finally, you people understand what we're up against.
There is a massive occult conspiracy. Occult means hidden, and it is a hidden conspiracy, but the evidence is not so hidden. The evidence is right in our face if we choose to look it in the eyes. You are listening to The Secret Teachings. I am Ryan Gable. The website is www.thesecretteachings.info. If you go on over to the website, you will find a full list of all of our past episodes that you can download and or stream for free. Last week, the 5th part of a 5-part series, Sustainable Development and Agenda 21, and we had Jim Marrs, award-winning journalist and author of Population Control, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us. He came on the program to talk to us about that new book and about the other aspects of population control that we have been covering. In the previous 2 hours of today's program, we spoke to Brad Olsen. He's written a couple of books as well called Modern Esoteric and Future Esoteric. And these 2 books are really, really jam-packed with information. And if you haven't had a chance to read them yet, I would highly advise you to try to find a way, whether it's PDF or whether you can get a copy, to get these books and read them. Brad Olsen, Jim Marrs, 2 of my favorite authors of all time, especially when it comes to the information we discuss here on The Secret Teachings. All of their books are worth a good read. Brad Olsen also has a lot of books about travel. That's where he started in terms of writing. And he obviously has the CCC publishing, so he publishes other books. All the books that go through CCC are fantastic reads. I would highly recommend any of those to you, not because I'm being paid or being given books. Brad Olsen has not even sent me a book. I bought his books before I even knew him. So I'm just telling you this as a consumer and as a researcher. Those books are top of the line, and so are the books that Jim Marrs writes. Probably my favorite book that Jim Marrs has written so far, even though I've read Population Control, I just got finished with it. I think Rule by Secrecy really gives you a very precise, documented, and analytical overview of all of the different secret societies and specifically the different conspiratorial points of view throughout history. If you want to know about aliens, Alien Agenda is probably one of the best books you'll ever read on the subject. And if you want to read Brad Olsen's books, his get more into a spiritual side of things, though he does pick out specific points such as GMOs and chemtrails. And he's got a lot of interesting facts in those books and a lot of photographs that are somewhat difficult to find and that you can't just pick up any old book and it's just a repeating of what other people have said. He's got some very unique independent research in those books as well. So Brad Olsen, his books, and Jim Marrs and his books are probably 2 of the better places to start if you're just getting into any of the things that we talk about here on The Secret Teachings. And I say that because I used to get asked a lot, where do you get your information from? Where do you spend time researching? I'm sure you get most of this from the internet, don't you? I say, no, the only thing that I get from the internet are news articles like we have today. And a lot of the times, people send me news articles, so I don't even spend time, reading and scouring through thousands of different articles on the internet. People just send me stuff, or I'll just come across it, and I won't have to really do much research, because a lot of things nowadays are becoming so mainstream. Even the Planned Parenthood videos, although the articles that are becoming mainstream sort of try to debunk and try to smooth over the negative image, the very rough image that society is beginning to have towards Planned Parenthood, or at least our society here in America. But nevertheless, it's getting into the mainstream. And there's some other news articles I wanted to talk about today that are very mainstream, and that you really don't have to do much digging to find this information out there. And a lot of news articles don't necessarily imply some underlying agenda. I just use them as a starting point. I use them as a base so that I can do some investigation and then expand on whatever the story might be. So obviously this first article here probably won't come as any surprise to you. Although this is not done in America, the Russians have removed several foreign detergents from their shops. And the reason for this, according to the Moscow AP, is because they pose health threats. The Russian Consumer Protection Agency said in a statement Tuesday that recent inspections of selected goods by top foreign brands such as Colgate, Palmolive, and Procter & Gamble have found high levels of toxic ingredients in them. Moscow extended its ban earlier this month on selected food imports from the 28-nation European Union. They've also banned GMOs in Russia, and I think it was Putin's government came out and said, we will not poison our own people. We will not poison our own people. It's a little bit different than what you hear from the Obama administration, who basically says you're scared of science if you don't want to take part in a massive genetically modified food experiment. Who knows what the outcome will be? The Russians say that the ban of imports of detergents or washing liquids has not been enacted, and most of the products mentioned by the agency actually have production facilities in Russia, although they're pulling some of these products from the shelf because of quote-unquote health risks that they pose. Of course, the Associated Press reported that Procter & Gamble shot back and said, we are committed to ensuring that our products are safe to use and meet or exceed regulations. Now, my question is, in 1976, there's the Toxic Substance Control Act that was passed, and a lot of chemicals that are in food and a lot of chemicals that are in everyday household items were kind of grandfathered in without regulation whatsoever. So most of these companies don't necessarily have an incentive to make products safer when most of the regulations don't apply, first of all, and second of all, most chemicals are just assumed safe. As a matter of fact, most chemicals are assumed safe until they harm somebody. That's basically the law on the books right now. Most chemicals that are in your everyday household cleaning products, most chemicals that are even put into your food are just considered safe until they cause problems in the public, and the public begins to report these issues. And then the regulatory bodies, at least, they get up out of their chair, they stretch, they make it look like they're going to do something about it. But obviously, the FDA, the USDA, other government regulatory bodies are typically in bed with the very corporations they're supposed to regulate. There is a revolving door that's just constant 360 rotation between these regulatory bodies and many of the biggest corporations, especially in the biotech realm when we're talking about a Monsanto and an FDA. One of the most famous people who just seem to be stuck in that revolving door is a Michael Taylor, whose wife also worked for the FDA and was basically spearheading the movement for Codex Alimentarius and labeling natural herbs, natural remedies as drugs, and trying to get the FDA, even to the United Nations, she was trying to do this. The FDA was trying to get these natural supplements labeled as drugs so the FDA could regulate them. And the only reason that is, it's not because of your safety. They don't care about your safety. They care about making money. They don't care about your safety. So when they try to get these natural supplements labeled as drugs so that they can regulate them, all this does is it basically scoops up all of the resources you would otherwise have to cure yourself of certain ailments without spending millions of dollars on different treatments. Where, it's funny how when we had the Ebola scare, the government says we have no cure for Ebola, but hey, don't try those alternative cures. Those are illegal. Well, if you have no cure, why shouldn't we just try anything for cancer, for Ebola, for AIDS? When that's not even true, because the government owns multiple patents for the Ebola virus. They have patents for the curing of AIDS. They've got patents for the curing of cancer. There's different forms of cancer, of course, and there's some very simple ways to treat a lot of these ailments. But what happens, and it's just like the Russians banning some of these household products that we take, we just take for granted here in the U.S. We don't think anything about it because we're not really informed. What happens is that we live this virtual reality where we're just put on autopilot, and we'll buy ABC detergent, and we'll buy ABC food, and we start eating that food and using that detergent or using that soap, and we develop a skin rash. And instead of thinking that maybe it's the new soap, instead of thinking maybe it's the food I'm eating, every time I eat this particular food, I get a really bad skin irritation, or every time I use this soap, my skin gets really red and itchy. Maybe it's actually the product that I'm using. Instead, we've been conditioned to believe that if something happens to us, it's not any of the great American products. What actually the problem is that we're lacking the necessary dosage of heavy pharmaceutical, psychological drugs that we need to take in order to keep ourselves healthy. We are on autopilot, and we've been conditioned not to pay attention to the source of any of our problems, but to the symptoms of those problems, because the symptoms treated creates massive profits for the corporations that basically know that the products are causing problems, especially when it comes to the chemical industry, because these chemicals are considered safe until there's a problem reported. Even then, though, look at something like aspartame. 70% of adverse reactions to food reported to the FDA, 70% out of millions, is aspartame. People report that aspartame causes all types of different issues. I mean, neurological disorders, skin problems, vision problems, inflammation. And yet, the FDA does nothing about it. It's also a carcinogen, and the FDA does nothing about it. Now, you could say that it's just lack of dedication to their job, or it's negligence. I wish it was negligence, because and maybe in some cases it is negligence. But at the end of the day, when you isolate vaccinations and you realize vaccine companies are exempt from the ramifications of the vaccination causing harm to a child, there's laws on the books that prevent vaccine manufacturers from being sued. When medication causes, legally prescribed medication, mind you, causes more deaths than all illegal drugs do combined. When the food that we eat is literally poisoned, the beverages we drink are literally poisoned with rat poison, cockroach poison, literally in the food, rat poison. You have to start thinking that it's not just negligence. Even if it was negligence on the part of the regulatory bodies, why are the other companies putting these ingredients into the food? Why are these companies putting these ingredients into cleaning products? We live in an ocean of electromagnetic radiation. We live in an ocean of, it's just a toxic environment. There's a lot of ways to try to stay away from these toxins, and also not just toxins, but the privacy concerns we face as a people now, especially here in America. I'll go into some of those reasons later in the program towards the end of the show today. But I just want people to understand that if you're feeling ill, you're feeling sick, maybe it is the Wi-Fi signals and sleeping with the phone next to your head every night. Maybe it's watching too much television, playing too many video games, not putting down your iPad at night. Maybe it's what you're drinking. Maybe it's the food you're eating. Maybe it's the chemicals that you have in your house. Maybe it's the soap that you're now using in your bathroom. I don't know. Something can contribute to illness. Obviously, we have more people sick in this country than any other country in the world. More people are incarcerated in this country than any other country in the world. And yet we spend more money on health in this country than any other country in the world. And yet we have the sickest population. That has to tell you something. And the reason we spend so much money is because there is a concerted effort, some type of agenda to keep people sick. And obviously, with a lot of the products that we use in our everyday lives, these products are not necessarily engineered to make you sick, but the companies that engineer them do whatever they can to produce a product at the cheapest price possible. They spend the rest of the money on public relations to make you think that it's safe. And, of course, the regulatory bodies that are supposed to regulate those industries are basically just another branch of that industry. So it doesn't do much good. Just keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, the next time you feel ill. Maybe you should keep a food journal. Pay attention to what you do in your everyday lives without just immediately running to the doctor, who will just treat the symptoms rather than the root cause of whatever problem you may have. Here's a pretty disgusting news article also from Yahoo News. It says there's probably poo in your ground beef, but should you care? I don't know. Does anybody out there care? Probably not. It says Consumer Reports recently tested some 300 packages of ground beef purchased in 26 cities nationwide, and every single sample contained bacteria that, quote, signified fecal contamination, end quote. So that sounds really delicious, especially with football season coming up. You're going to have your cookouts and your barbecues, and now we've got basically poop in your ground beef. That's disgusting. Oh, boy. What else do we have here? Let's change the subject a little bit in terms of news. This news article here actually got 3 in a row from Yahoo News. I'm saying it's right in the mainstream now. There's a lot of stuff that we can just talk about and use as a launching pad for discussion on the program. This article here says, why does the U.S. lead the world in mass shootings? A new study argues it's a product of the dark side of American exceptionalism. The article says the United States has had 5 times the number of mass shootings in the last 50 years than any other country, a new study by the University of Alabama criminologist Adam Lankford finds. For decades, he says, people have wondered if the dark side of American exceptionalism is a cultural propensity for violence. And in recent years, perhaps no form of violence is seen as more uniquely American than public mass shootings. That's just, first of all, not true. According to the study presented this week at the American Sociological Association's annual meeting in Chicago, it's a great place to take this, place that has some of the strictest gun laws and yet the highest rates of crime. There were 291 documented mass shootings in the world between 1966 and 2012, with 90, or 31%, occurring in the United States. I don't really get what the guy's saying here. So he writes that a unique form of violence is public mass shootings in America, and yet 31% of all mass shootings took place in America. I don't see that as uniquely American. If it was like 95%, that would be more uniquely American, but 31%, that's just above a quarter. To me, throws up a little bit of a red flag there. The article says, why do so many mass shootings happen in America? And I'm just going through this with you as a listener, as if you were reading the news. This is how we have to break this down. Say, why do so many mass shootings happen in America? Think about it for a second. He says there are several factors. I'll give you 3 of them. America's high rate of gun ownership, which I will describe to you, is completely false. The idolization of fame among U.S. mass shooters, and that is true to a certain extent. The reason that these mass shooters, they're not idolized, but the reason that they are celebritized, if you will, is because it helps to promote an agenda and keep people in fear and terror that they might be shot at any time, they might be in a movie theater, they might be in a school, and a shooter might come in and open fire. It keeps people scared. It's a type of social control. And he says the other reason that we have so many mass shootings is because of the dark side of American exceptionalism. The article also says the failure of the U.S. healthcare system to treat mental illness is partially to blame for America's disappropriation of mass shootings, but it's a unique factor. So, here are my thoughts. First of all, lots and lots and lots of drugs are to blame for most of the mass shootings. It's not a high rate of gun ownership, and let me break that down for you. In 1968, there was the Gun Control Act passed. Prior to that, you could own basically any sort of weapon that you wanted. Semi-automatic weapons did not matter, yet no school shootings occurred. At least no big school shootings that were highly promoted. I'm sure there were still some shootings here or there. No school shootings compared to the ones we experience in the modern day. And that was prior to 1968. Here's some statistics for you. 5%. Actually, it's less than 5%, but rounding up, 5% of the world population lives in the United States. 35 to 50%, it's a pretty big percentage gap. 35 to 50% have guns. So in terms of gun ownership, the United States citizenry owns the highest amount of guns in the world. And this is where this criminologist is stating that since our country has a high rate of gun ownership, we have more violent crimes. So, if we have the highest rate of gun ownership in the world, and that's the reason we have so much violent crime, then how come the next in line in terms of high rates of gun ownership are Switzerland and Finland, who have the lowest crime rates in the world? Think about that for a second. He took his information, his study, Mr. Langford did, to Chicago. Now, Chicago, Los Angeles, and some other cities have some of the strictest gun laws in the United States. Chicago has some of the strictest in the United States. I'd say up there in the top 3. Yet, they have more violence than any other city. I mean, it's almost every day you hear about shootings in Chicago. Strictest gun laws, more violence. Some places that have very loose gun laws, there's hardly any violence. All the money and the resources that we pump into agencies to protect us, such as the NSA or the FBI, especially after 9/11, claiming that it will keep us safer, it will keep us protected. These agencies were not able to stop the Tsarnaev brothers, who were essentially financed through George Soros affiliates. They were not able to stop Aaron Alexis, who was on the antidepressant Trazodone. They were not able to stop James Holmes, who was on a generic form of Zoloft. Wade Michael Page, Soing Ho Cho, probably pronouncing that wrong, who was being psychologically evaluated with different forms of psychotropic drugs. Nadal Hassan from Fort Hood, who was on Ambien and other depression medication. Ivan Lopez, also Fort Hood shooter. Or any of the other incidents that have occurred in the past couple of years that have been used as justification to take guns out of the hands of the American people. Now, you can argue and say, there's a concerted effort to get rid of guns, and the other side argues and says, no, nobody's trying to get your guns. I'm not on either side of that argument. I don't want to be even grouped in remotely close to that argument. What I'm telling you now are facts and statistics that if you look at them for a second and you have any brain cells that are active in your head, you can realize that guns are not directly responsible. And I don't even own a gun right now. I don't have a gun right now. Used to, but I don't have a gun right now. So I'm not promoting guns. I'm not getting paid to tell you to buy a gun. I don't care if you buy a gun. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just telling you, statistically, places that have higher gun ownership have lower crime. Now, the reason that the U.S. has such high gun ownership and yet has such high crime is not because of the guns. It's because of the drugs that so many people in this country are on. You know, even according to the CDC, 11%, I'm talking to thousands of kids, 11% of school children now are on some type of antidepressant. psychological medication. You wonder why there is an increase in violence. It's because of the drugs. How many of these drugs do you look up, even on their website, and it will claim may cause violent outbursts? It zombifies the population. Not to mention that many of the so-called domestic terrorist attacks are funded. The men responsible are trained and given a free pass and materials by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who then at the last second steps in and saves the day. Is it a coincidence that James Holmes was working with the Salk Institute in San Diego, which prior to him working there was partnered with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, working on a type of superhuman? Is it any coincidence that James Holmes was working on a type of research into neurological programming, into the concepts of time and the brain, mind control, basically? Is that any coincidence? Is it any coincidence that Adam Lanza's mom supposedly worked also with DARPA? I believe that a lot of these mass shooters, and I thought this, and I wrote it actually in my first book, are part of a very, very dark, in the sense that few people know about it, a black operation, if you will, grouping of children. If you ever saw that show Fringe, the main character, Olivia Dunham, she found out that she was involved in these experiments when she was a child, and she was put on these different types of drugs that allowed her to see into the other dimensions, and that there were other kids, as children, there were other kids that were involved in this, and eventually they grew up and they went to different families. Some of them were adopted, and they just spread out all over the place, and they just forgot each other. They were kids. I feel like that's what happens with a lot of these mass shooters, that they come from a place of engineered psychosis, where they are literally brainwashed. They literally have their perceptions wiped and reinstalled. It's like creating a second personality. And then you load them up on these different types of drugs, antidepressants, SSRIs, and they go crazy. That's my feeling on this. And the fact that we spend so much money on security and safety, and we can't seem to stop the violence, just like the increase in guns seems to decrease violence, when the decrease in guns seems to increase violence, doesn't it just at some point make you sit back and wonder, the more we push for gun regulations, the more violent society gets. The more we push for drug regulations, the more violent society tends to get. The more the police push protesters, the more violent the situation tends to get. We find police officers now being trained by the Israeli military. The Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange is a program where members of the police departments in Georgia and Atlanta go to Israel to learn how to deal with basically a form of anti-terrorism. They train with the Israeli military. The University of California at Berkeley began a training program about 4 years ago, where they started a deal basically with Yaman, which is an Israeli border police. They're they call it counterterrorism, but they're responsible for the assassination of Palestinian militant leaders. Why are foreign governments training our police officers? And you wonder why there's a major increase in violence. Look at what the Palestinians are subjected to by the Israeli military and the police. That's what's happening to us in this country now. And there's actually some former police officers in Israel who have said that the next country is America. This is going to happen here, and we're already seeing the increase in police brutality and violence here in America. Let me go ahead and skip to the next topic, because we're going to run out of time if I do not. I had an article here. Mike D actually sent me this. It says, ex-NASA employee downloaded hundreds of images, videos of child porn on his computer while he worked at NASA. Donald Lawson from Titusville, who was fired from NASA after 30 years. This man was downloading hundreds of pictures and videos of children engaged in sex acts and he would also record children in the nude. Now, that came out the same time when we heard, if you heard, maybe you didn't hear, Jared Fogle, the Subway guy, longtime Subway spokesman, was busted with child pornography and soliciting minors for sex. A lot of the porn actually came from the director of his charitable foundation, who was arrested a couple of months ago, Russell Taylor, who was also charged with child pornography and voyeurism. My point to this, because people say, "Oh, why would you talk about that? That's so disgusting. It's so negative." I'm talking about it because it goes on and because nobody else wants to talk about it, so I guess I'll be the only one to talk about it. And nobody seems to want to have these discussions until it affects them directly. We're dealing with an international, it's very rooted within our own government agencies, an international network that peddles drugs, weapons, children, very dark stuff. Some of the biggest names are involved. Until we wake up and understand at least the concept of that, it would be very difficult for us to grasp what reality really is. Instead, we live in this fanciful virtual reality thinking that everything is just fine, that stories like this one couldn't happen. Headline, Mirror.uk, VIP pedophile ring abused teenage boys inside Buckingham Palace and Balmoral Castle, which is a royal retreat in Scotland. The article from the Mirror.uk tells the story of the 16-year-old boy who was abused by members of the royal household at Buckingham Palace. According to Home Office files, the teenage boy was supposedly groomed as a part of a VIP pedophile ring operating within the royal family. The article says during his time at Buckingham Palace, the 16-year-old was approached by notorious pedophile Sir Peter Heyman and was asked to work for him in Canada, where he was ambassador. Heyman has been identified as a member of the VIP pedophile ring operating in Westminster and is also known to have had royal connections. Of course, so did Jimmy Savile, who was abusing women and children in the basement of some of the hospitals where he volunteered. People like, remember Jerry Sandusky at Penn State? All of this ties into a much deeper network, and if you start to at least look at individual stories like this, you'll see that it all ties into a much larger network, because that story reminds me of this story from 1989. Washington Times. Homosexual prostitution inquiry ensnares VIPs with Reagan and Bush. The article from 1989 says a homosexual prostitution ring is under investigation by federal and district authorities and includes among its clients key officials of the Reagan and Bush administrations, military officers, congressional aides, and U.S. and foreign businessmen with close social ties to Washington's political elite. My last book, False Prophets and the Lovers of Children, I broke down people like Jeffrey Epstein, convicted pedophile, has a little black book with names in there of people that come to his retreat on his private Caribbean island, such as Bill Clinton, Mick Jagger, even Donald Trump, I think, was listed in there. I can't be sure. I'd have to verify that, but I know that for sure there were some very, very big names in there. Bryan Singer was accused also by children doing like a type of teenage boy casting couch in Hollywood for Hollywood actors that were trying to get into the movie business. We see this on all levels. Disney World, Hollywood, the Vatican, Washington. Why is that? Do you think these are isolated cases? They're not isolated cases. The media tries to make it look like they're isolated cases when the evidence becomes too overwhelming, but the fact is they are not isolated cases. What this is the dam beginning to break and the water starting to seep through. And if you look at one part of the dam and you see a little tiny crack and some water that's just slowly leaking through, that's where the media takes your face and they shove it right there at that crack and they say, here's the only problem. It's one crack. And meanwhile, above your head, the dam is beginning to split and the water's pouring over and you're about to be engulfed in it. At the break, I played that clip from the X-Files with Scully talking about an occult conspiracy and there's no evidence. There is evidence of an occult conspiracy. It's just not as dark as one might think. It's not as Hollywood-esque as one might think. The evidence of an occult conspiracy of millions and millions of people being killed comes in the form of different practices. One of the most well-known is genocide. Of course, the name was basically, or the word basically was changed in definition not to be affiliated with the acts of the American colonies and the government that we have today. Genocide is another name for it. The Holocaust of Native Americans is an article I have from strategicculture.org. It says Holocaust of Native Americans, 65 million and counting. According to some reports, 65 million Native Americans died from genocidal practices of Western colonizers from the time of Christopher Columbus in 1492 up into the 19th century. 65 million. That's just about the number of people that Mao Zedong killed in communist China during peace times. And the reason I bring that up is because when you look at evidence for a conspiracy, if you will, you find more evidence of this in the black population targeted by Planned Parenthood. Talked about Margaret Sanger and her distrust and hatred for many ethnic groups. And when you look at Planned Parenthood, and recently another video came out where the CEO of Stem Express, the company that was dealing in the fetal remains with Planned Parenthood, who supposedly pulled support and doesn't do business with them anymore, the CEO was talking about how they needed more liver tissue. She said 50 more livers a week would be ideal. Then she started talking with these prospective buyers. Her name is Kate Dyer, by the way, D-Y-E-R, Kate Dyer, CEO of Stem Express. She's talking about intact specimens. Once again, it's just easier to ship an intact specimen, especially when you're dealing with neural tissue, which she says is basically so fragile you wouldn't even believe it when you ship it. I'm not even going to get into the details of this because we unfortunately don't have enough time, but the article with the video is available at thesecretteachings.info. In fact, all of the videos are there, and on the Secret Teachings website, on the homepage, you should be able to scroll down and find my news article about Planned Parenthood that I wrote with a little bit of a history of Planned Parenthood, and if there's not the video embedded from the CMP in the article, you should be able to find a link to it. The article is called The Planned Parenthood Eugenics Agenda, Fetuses Harvested for Profit. And in some of these, there is some graphic imagery for some people, but you have to see it to believe it. You have to see it to understand what's happening. So many people, just like the food and just like the water and the environment and the household chemicals we talked about, so many people just ignore these stories because it's just like the senators who voted on the bill to defund Planned Parenthood. Most of them that voted no, we don't want to defund Planned Parenthood, admitted they never even watched the investigative videos. Because you have been conditioned to believe that that's not possible, so why even make it an issue? The only thing that really concerns me and bothers me is that you do have people on left and right politically saying we should defund Planned Parenthood, and it's usually because the people that want to defund Planned Parenthood, specifically Republicans, say that because they're anti-abortion. Whatever the case might be, and whoever we have to get behind to defund a literal criminal institution such as Planned Parenthood, fine, but that doesn't mean that I support any of these people that are calling to defund Planned Parenthood. And that goes for anybody out there listening who sees things the way that I do in relationship to this. Don't group yourself in to those types of conservative Republican viewpoints just because they have one issue that they've brought up that you somewhat agree with. There's a lot of other issues out there. And let me give you an example. When the story of the Planned Parenthood selling the aborted fetal tissue, livers, kidneys, brains, intact specimens, when that story broke, the media was very non-existent in terms of reporting on that story. And yet, we see investigative videos with reporters, or journalists rather, from the CMP, which is anti-abortion. So the media tried to say, well, since this group is anti-abortion, they made these videos up. Well, how did they really make the videos up when some of the biggest names from Planned Parenthood, and including the CEO in this video, Kate Dyer, of STEM Express, the company that Planned Parenthood was working intimately with, is on video for... These videos are cut into 9-10 minute segments, but the evidence in terms of how much was recorded is 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 hours. I mean, they have dozens and dozens and dozens of videos and probably hundreds of hours of footage that they've edited down. Now, I'm sure that some of the videos have been manipulated, only in the sense that some parts were cut out to make STEM Express or Planned Parenthood look pretty bad. I don't doubt that, and that's why I don't get behind a CMP, the Center for Medical Progress. That also doesn't mean that I support Planned Parenthood in the least. I'm getting behind the momentum that a CMP has created and the attention that they've brought to Planned Parenthood, and saying I don't necessarily agree with any pro-abortion, anti-abortion standpoints, political affiliations, yet these people are doing something that is beneficial. They are informing the public of what this Planned Parenthood institution is really all about. And I think that that's a good thing. That doesn't mean that I am involved with the other side. We have to take a step back and observe what's happening. And when all of this broke in the news, Obama in the White House says that we need to worry about organ harvesting of African albinos. Yeah, that's a problem. I'm sure it is. The organ harvesting in China is another major problem. I spoke with 3 representatives here in Boise, Idaho, of Falun Gong, or Falun Dafa, which is a spiritual, religious belief system that was outlawed in China in 1999 by the communist leader Jiang Zemin. And since then, practitioners of this belief have been held in brainwashing centers. They've been subjected to psychiatric abuse, sexual abuse, and a lot of them are detained and their organs are harvested for people, people that come to China, well, maybe they're foreign dignitaries, people that come that are very wealthy, and they need an organ. Maybe they get sick, something happens, whatever the case might be. They use these spiritual prisoners as a way to obtain the organs. They actually have mobile execution vehicles in China where they'll just roll up and pick you up off the street. That's happening in China to political prisoners, and that's part of Agenda 21, is to stifle religious beliefs and create a one-world religion. And it's funny that one-world religion that's created is a universal religion, which is the basic definition of Catholicism. And you have the Pope, Jorge Bergoglio, coming to America to address our Congress on topics such as sustainable development. A Vatican that is, there's not even a word to describe, that is buried deeper than the deepest, darkest pit of hell in the trafficking of children, the abuse of children, drug running, gun running. I mean, the Vatican is they own so much land. It's incredible to me how people can look at these representatives and they've been conditioned to see them as above the law. No matter what they do, they're above the law. So it couldn't be a politician's fault. It couldn't be a religious leader's fault. It must be the people's fault. It's just like the vaccines. It's just like the food. It's just like the chemicals that we talked about in household products. It couldn't be the chemical that's making you sick. It must be because you don't have this new drug. Taking the power out of the hands of the American people perceptually, out of the hands of the global population, and they've made it seem as if all the woes in the world are created by you to further dehumanize you as part of this globalist agenda, this globalist plot. I saw a picture. I had a picture of it here. I can't remember where I put it, though. And it was from The Economist. It had a baby on the front, the new Economist magazine, and it had a baby. And it talked about a genetically engineered humanity, about how we can prevent baldness, how we can change the eye color, we can change the genetics of a baby, and you can basically pay for a child before they're born, and they'll be genetically engineered to your liking. I don't know what you, ladies and gentlemen, think about that concept, because I don't see it as a religious issue in terms of playing God. But I see it as a dehumanizing issue, and I see it as another step towards transhumanism, and in tying together the Planned Parenthood stories and the selling of this aborted fetal tissue and neural cells, the glial cells, to laboratories where they're inserting them into mice to create a much more intelligent mouse, is also part of this transhuman agenda. And just like we've been conditioned not to blame or worry about the direct effects of the drugs, the chemicals, the vaccines, the foods, the beverages, the air we breathe, and we think that the problem is somewhere else, we don't put together the pieces. We don't connect the dots. And therefore, it doesn't look like a conspiracy. We don't connect the dots between criminal institutions. We don't connect the dots between religious and political leaders who are implemented in crimes against humanity. The abuse of children. We see these stories at NASA, Jared Fogle at Subway, Buckingham Palace, the Vatican. Ratzinger can't even leave the Vatican because he'll be prosecuted for child trafficking and the abuse of children. If we don't connect the dots, they just seem like isolated incidences. But if we do connect the dots, the world that seems so complex will actually begin to make sense. I am Ryan Gable. The website, www.thesecretteachings.info. Go to the website, find all of the news articles we discussed today, as well as all of our past shows that you can download or stream for free. And please help support the program by donating to The Secret Teachings at the very top right of the homepage through PayPal. All donations over $20, and I will send you a copy in PDF form of either The Grand Illusion, Slaves to Perception, or False Prophets and the Lovers of Children. Until next week, I am Ryan Gable. Coming up on the program, we have Freeway Ricky Ross. We have Nancy Appleton. We have, who else do we have listed? I don't know. We've got so many bigger names coming up here in the next couple of weeks. Stay tuned. Auf Wiedersehen and Namaste.
I have certain rules I live by. My first rule, I don't believe anything the government tells me.